you like the cup of coffee?
I think I just had one.
You just had one, would you like to have another one?
I believe not.
Maybe pour him a glass of water.
It must be as bad as this that they sent down here this morning.
What'd you say?
Coffee. Getting a little rough.
Started with it about 5:30 this morning. Sorry, all in.
I've seen you for a spell, Tommy.
Been working,
You've
Paul.
been staying pretty busy up there.
Being a district attorney is almost a full-time job, even though they call it a part-time one when you don't take full pay.
Right, I know what you're talking about. Well, let me say, Mr. Littlejohn, we appreciate you very much coming out to meet with us here this morning. Of course, I've been knowing you for a number of years. You haven't served in both houses of the legislature, active in the Young Democrats and all that stuff, you know. We're happy to have you here this morning. Now, we mailed out to you a copy of our program with a brochure of sorts, in the hopes that it would perhaps give you an opportunity to familiarize yourself with a number of things that we're concerned about. We won't read all these things to you. We'll simply go down the list and have a little discussion and get your views on several different things. On the opening statement on that thing we sent out to you, we talked about the role played by collective bargaining in the country. Then asked the question, you believe that collective bargaining ought to be encouraged and discouraged in Mississippi? And specifically, what role should the governor play in the collective bargaining process of labor management relations is what we're really talking about. So I'd like to speak to that one for a few minutes, if you would.
Well, first of all, let me thank you all for this invitation. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you, and as Claude has mentioned, I have served in the legislature for 8 years back in my younger days, and of course with the Young Democrats in my younger years. But still I'm under 40, so maybe I can qualify for consideration.
As a Young Democrat.
As to your specific question here, I think, of course, the role of collective bargaining should be encouraged. We know the predicate for that was laid back with the passage of the National Labor Relations Act back as far as the federal Congress is concerned. We've been a little bit slow with this process of encouragement in Mississippi. I think the working people of this state have suffered as a result. I think that collective bargaining is the proper role for labor management relationships in this state. I think that the governor of this state has the opportunity to exert some moral leadership here. As you all are well aware of, the governor of this state positioned itself as a weak office, one of the weakest in the nation, unfortunately. I hate to see this, and I hope that one day it'll be a stronger position. But in a sense, it's only so strong as the man who occupies it, or conversely as weak as the one who fulfills that position. I don't think we've had any governors in the past, quite frankly, who have taken any positive leadership, as they should, in behalf of really the working people of the state. I don't mean to be demagogic about this. I'm sincere when I say this. I say it because I know the role of the working people of this state. I've come from them. My mother has worked for over 20 years in a shirt factory in North Mississippi, and she still works there. I know what employees of this state have faced over that period of time. I'm grateful that she's had a job because it made possible me getting an education, a college education. But I also know what it means when some of the factories every time the minimum wage is increased, they up production in order to make an employee come up with more production of goods in order to just get a minimum wage. So I know what the problems are. And I know as governor of this state where my concern will lie for the working people of this state. And I also know that we in Mississippi are not a highly industrialized state. I think we've got to continue to attract industry every way that we can, good industry. We haven't reached the point yet that we can be totally selective in the industry that we get or seek. But I think we've had about enough of low-paying industries providing low-paying jobs. And this has been my concern. And to that extent, perhaps that's a little bit couched in ambiguity, but nevertheless, I think it's founded upon common sense and reality. And it's here that the governor's office can exert the type of leadership if he's really basically sympathetic to the role of the working man. And this is the underlying ingredient of collective bargaining as I see it. After all, he appoints all you a number of boards and commissions and agencies and all of this. And I think this should be one of his underlying considerations as governor of the state.
Very good, very good. Sorry that Mr. Woodson wasn't able to hear all of your statement.
Yeah, I apologize for that, you know, we got this situation at Dantin, up at
Yeah.
Columbus, and
Well,
trying to get Hicks to get the work done.
yeah, well, I understand, why you had to take the telephone call, but he made a statement that's in line with the statement that you made when we interviewed some other candidates, what I was thinking about the weak position, the governor's position we've got here, and he pretty well agreed with a few things that you said, and a couple of the other candidates is what I was getting at there. And, of course, I've been knowing Mr. Littlejohn for a number of years, as he said in his opening statement, Brother Woodson, that, you know, he served in both houses of the legislature, and was active in the Young Democrats for a number of years, and that type of thing, you know. That's the part that I was getting at. Mr. Woodson, Talmadge, is also active in the Young Democrats and the Old Democrats and all other kind of Democrats. You know? Right.
He's a little younger than I.
So anyhow, we're happy to have you here, and I appreciate your opening statement. Very good. Of course, the thing that we're concerned about out of the governor's office in the area of labor management relations is we've had some experiences in the past where the governor's office itself was used on the side of management and labor disputes and efforts to organize workers and things of this kind, and then the highway patrol on a couple occasions has been used, we think, unjustified, you know, in some situations. And this is what we are getting at, perhaps more, you know, in that question and everything else. But I think you made a very good statement. I want to commend you on it. So we'll go now to the brochure itself and get your views on a few things on that. Several things here, of course, that perhaps we don't want to spend a lot of time on. There's several here that we would definitely like to get your views on, and we'll start out with item 1. What we're concerned about there more than anything else is the possibility of a constitutional amendment that would provide for an initiative from referendum procedure, similar to the one that's in the state of Arkansas. That's what we're talking about. You're probably familiar with that.
Yes.
You'd like to speak to that?
Well, let me go back a little bit and draw on my political science major out here at Mississippi College at Clinton, and a little bit in law school, I guess you'd call it, and also on 2 terms in the legislature. But I'm the only man in this race who has served as a working member of both the House of Representatives and the State Senate. I quite frankly and quite honestly am not, under Mississippi circumstances at this time, in favor of an initiative type referendum procedure. To be perfectly frank with you. I say this not in any sense of a political role, but really as a student of government. I'm no scholar in government, but and I base that on those 8 years of experience in the legislature, because I think that the tool is there for the individual representatives who are supposed to represent the people of this state to do with our Constitution what needs to be done. I regard the Constitution of this state, and I say this admittedly knowing of the limitations within the present 1890 document. But the Constitution is a basic document that you just don't tinker with every weekend. It's a document that government is based on, really, and it's the foundation stone of our government. And I think sometimes we're prone to want to amend it too often. This is why I'm basically for the constitutional amendment route as it now stands, quite honestly. Admittedly, I'm aware of some of the problems that are met in the legislature, particularly in some of you committees now, where constructive amendments are stifled. Here again, the leadership of the governor's office can come into play in prying some of these out of the committee if he knows how to work with the legislature without trying to dictate to them. But that's my comments as to this. Now, I'm well aware of the merits that the Arkansas system and provision provides. I know this is one of the basic tools in political science to get these things done. But I think that the route is easy enough now for amendments for the people's representatives, the name of the members of the legislature, to propose those. Because having served in the legislature, it's not all that hard if you really know how to get an amendment out through the Constitution Committee. I served on the Constitution Committee in the Senate. And it's a matter of being able to work with people and convince them of the merits of your proposal. And then I've heard members of the legislature speak too much. Well, what's wrong with letting the people vote on this? And they've got that right now.
Well, we don't have any, this is not a burning issue with us. And we recognize the fact there are some pitfalls involved in this type thing, as experience in other states have indicated. The state of California, I guess, is perhaps one of the most recent places where an outrageous proposition by an issue referendum was put on the statute books, and consequence was passed, and now they're having some real problems as a result. But we did want your views on it. On the second one there, if the committee, unless they have a question to go on that one, we'll go to item 2 on the fact that we feel that we need a Department of Labor, or some department of function as such. We're one of the few states in the nation that does not have a Department of Labor, or some department of state government to perform the necessary functioning of a state Department of Labor. And we'd like you to give us your views on that subject.
I'll be glad to. My position is plainly and most emphatically that I would be in favor of the establishment of the State Department of Labor and the state government of Mississippi. I say that for this reason. You represent this organization itself, some 90,000 people in this state who are working members. This within itself is justification, I think, for such a department. I'm going on record in this campaign at the outset for the recommending the abolition of state agencies or reduction of them. I've done this for the simple reason that since I left the state senate in 1967, we've added 23 new state agencies to state government. At that time, when I left Jackson to assume the role of district attorney, we had 138 state agencies. Today we've got 161. Now, some of those I realize are special agencies and so forth. But this is an increase of 17% in 8 years, and I don't think we can afford this type of snowballing in state agencies. But I do think that there's some basic departments you cannot overlook. And if we can afford a state film commission and a state board of water pollution control, I think we can afford a state department of labor. And all of these have their merits too, I realize that. But this is simply, we've got a Department of Agriculture and Commerce we've had for, of course, many years. And we should have. But in answer to your question, that's my position.
Well, we'll get on 16 in a little bit. We'll want your views there, and thoughts occur to us that perhaps if something's done in that area that in the process of reorganization, that perhaps a department can be created to perform the functions of the Department of Labor without necessarily setting up a brand new department.
I think you could combine your comp commission, some of these agencies, such as that, and this.
Okay, well,
if
you're...
I could just say
Yeah.
one thing, yeah, it's not a question, but I could just say one thing here. I guess, most of us have seen the paper or looked at television last night, you know, and it was a big story on there about them, filing suit against Highway 110, the I-10 down in Jackson County to protect the sand cranes. And nothing wrong with that. I hate to see that sand cranes disappear myself, but it just come to me when I was reading and seeing this that it's funny we didn't have no damn body to take up for these people that even in the plants and everything else, but they would take up for this bird. I just had to say something there. Don't get me wrong, I'm not running birds down or nothing else, but when it gets to where they take more interest in the birds than they do in the people, I don't go for that.
You ought to get the Mississippi Animal Rescue League and get after you on the dog sale at Ripley, and then you can go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I read that story.
You know,
about that.
they gonna make the state game fish commission takes care of the poor animals, but there's nothing to take care of the people.
That's
Now, the
what-
state game fish commission is gonna spend about $1.5 million to relocate these 40 birds.
No, they're trying to make them relocate the highway.
I know it, but they're gonna go, they're gonna wind up, the state's gonna purchase about 3,000 acres from somebody and relocate these 40 birds. It's gonna cost us $1 million. Now, I don't think 40 birds, I don't give a damn what can are worth $1 million. And
Well-
it's the last 40 in the world.
Let me say, Tom, which I appreciate your frankness on that. You do recognize that he is a
Slim,
department,
right.
at least
You
the
can't eat
performing
them, can you?
functions of the state
Well,
Department
pretty
of
to
Labor.
look at, right?
And if we can leave that bird subject, we'll get on down to the next one on
I saw that
the
too.
list.
I got mad last
I'm
night.
sorry I brought it up, but it was just eating the hell out of it, that's all it
I
was.
saw-
Hey, I'm very aware of what you're talking about. Matter of fact, that bird,
I saw that thing on
Bold
TV.
Roost, that's why I used to coon hunt down there where them sandhill cranes habitate, so I'm very familiar with that. Used to go out and listen to them conk all the time.
That's what I said to
So
myself.
let's get to item 3, the
It's
collective
on
bargaining question on public employees. So Tom, apparently you are fairly familiar, you've made a statement at the beginning about the National Labor Relations Act, so I assume that you do have some knowledge that some other candidates haven't had in this area. You're aware of the National Labor Relations Act, and perhaps you're not aware of the fact that there are a large group of people that are not covered by the National Labor Relations Act, public employees being one of the group. End result of all this is that we have a status of complete chaos out here in terms of public employees. And while we recognize the fact that many people in public office, when we talk about organizing public employees, they have a fear immediately of strikes by policemen and firemen and such as this. What we're trying to discuss here with candidates is the fact that we need an orderly procedure to deal with labor management relations in this area. And that if the law was properly drawn, that you'd do several things. You'd provide a vehicle, number one, for people out seeking ballot election for union representation as you do in the industrial sector. Number two, that arrangements should be made whereby problems can be resolved by way of a grievance procedure with arbitration as a final resort. That both parties to the agreement would have to agree to abide by the arbitration decision. But if the city government will say, refuse to abide by the arbitrated decision, and at that point, these people would have the right to strike. This is what we're talking about. Under Mississippi law, in case you're not too familiar with that subject, because of some of our past history, we have, organized a number of public employee unions in the split cities, and we do have, some of them do have recognition in contracts. Mississippi law is kind of silent on the subject, but the Attorney General has ruled in effect that a city government could legally under Mississippi law recognize and bargain, but that's the extent of it. So if you would speak to that for a few minutes.
Well, of course, this is in line with the opening statement here. I think, of course, that public employees ought to have the right under Mississippi law to organize for purpose of collective bargaining. I am opposed to legislation that would authorize a strike by public employees. I've got very sensitive feelings in this regard, because I think when a person assumes the responsibilities of working in a public job, maybe this is just a peculiar idiosyncrasy of mine, but I say it out of having worked 15 years for the public myself. I think he's got to make some certain reservations or sacrifice, or be willing to, for the general public good. You've got to lay aside a little bit of pecuniary selfishness to serve. I don't care if he's a fireman, policeman, and I say this after working with law enforcement officers and district attorney, and knowing on a first-hand basis what they face and what the public good demands. To this extent, I would have to be opposed, or at least have to request a limitation or restriction on this collective bargaining process for public employees. But the basic right through state law for them to organize and to function as such, I would favor.
We have any questions on that?
In other words, well, let me ask you one short question. If they set up something like Claude explained to you, and with arbitration, final and binding, on both parties, I kind of lean to your way just a little. But what is going to happen then if the city or the state or whatever it is says they go? You carry them to arbitration, you're not going to get, and you get a ruling that the employees is right, and then the city or whatever it is say, well, we're not going back. What would you propose to do then? I kind of agree with you, except that these employees, if they are right, and if they prove they are right, then what is going to force the employer, whoever he might be, to go by this ruling?
I think the only alternative would be twofold. One, a possible application in the appropriate judicial tribunals for relief under the civil rights provisions of your federal Constitution and state and federal statutes, and or if the situation presented itself with such aggravated fashion, I think that you would get the attention of the legislature and then have to go back and amend your statute to take care of the problem. Maybe sometimes we have to live through a little chaos in order to get progress.
That's a good idea.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, very good, Tommy. So, the next one, of course, is in an area that I'm sure you have a lot of expertise in, and that's the need to improve our workmen's compensation statutes, especially monetary benefits. That plus doctor's choice and the attorney fee thing in case it has to be litigated. Would you speak to that one?
Well, this one, if any of you noticed my opening announcement when I announced across the street over here on March 26th, you'll note that in one of the questions then, I noticed that the papers were careful, especially you had them on press, not to expose anything like this. But you had this to note, the fact that I then asked for a review of our workmen's compensation statutes. Now, I was a part of and a member of the House of Representatives when this last sentence that you've got in this section right here was instituted. I well recall one morning going into Ross Barnett's office. I was 24 years old, in the House of Representatives at the time, and he had this huge stack of telegrams from all over the state, urging certain amendments to the Mississippi Workmen's Compensation Law. I was at that time even taking a course in workmen's comp at Ole Miss in law school, trying to get out of law school. I hadn't even graduated then. I tried to be as fair as I knew how in voting either for or against these amendments, putting first and foremost of all what I thought was the best interest of the state of Mississippi. Some of these amendments need to be seriously reviewed in the light of this decade. I've seen this since that time more in the field or in the area of a practicing attorney, because I'm more of a plaintiff's counsel. I don't represent insurance companies. I represent some of these people who've been denied some of these benefits, and it's been rubber stamped all the way to the Supreme Court. And this is where I think that there needs to be a total airing, a review of our workman's comp statutes. I'm not so much concerned here with your initial thing here of raising the weekly benefits. I'm more concerned with the personal benefits, and I know the compensation is important. Don't misread me there. But I know what it means when a court rules, as I had last year on a heart case where a man had worked, given his life, struggling, working for a company. He goes home, drives a truck all the way from the Mississippi Gulf Coast to New Albany and to Tupelo, gets off at 4 in the morning, goes home a couple hours, sleep, comes back to work at 6:30 in the morning, sustains a heart attack on the job, a stroke combined and so forth. He's in the hospital by 7, crippled for life. Not one dime of compensation does the man get. We carried it up through the circuit court. It was just rubber stamped all the way because of some of our present decisions. To correct this, there's got to be a rewriting of the basic statute. You can't correct a Supreme Court decision with the present makeup of the Mississippi Supreme Court, because it's to an extent almost influenced just like your Workmen's Comp Commission. Now, this is where we've got to get at the problem on it as I see it. Now, I'm no radical in this. Again, I would put the public good first. But at the same time, I know in the last 12 to 14 years I've seen firsthand what has happened and what occurs on this. And I'll be glad to try to answer any questions in regard to it.
I think you've done about as good a job as I've ever done about what we are getting at on the need to revise the law. You're so right. The first thing I'd like for you to address yourself to, because of your experience in this area, is this problem of the injured worker having his freedom of choice of doctor. Would you speak to that? We can cite you several examples of some real bad experiences if you'd like.
think that the doctor, that the claimant should have his choice of a physician or a doctor. I think does that answer your question?
Yes, I think so.
What about this,
Mainly
the picking up where
the litigation where we,
the attorney's fee,
the case,
where the employer forces the employee to hire an attorney and then wins the case and the attorney gets 25%?
Well, and usually he earns every dime of it.
We're not saying he
attorney
don't.
earns it.
No, we're
Question.
saying,
I know
should the
that.
company or the
What you
insurance
talking
carrier
about,
pick
Pete?
up the,
We think he ought to be well paid, but you think it ought to be if he
There's,
gets the litigation.
you reach a point in here, I'm not saying that automatically they should be assessed with all the attorney's fees, because you reach a point here of deliberate procrastination on the part of either the insurance carrier or the employer.
Or the attorney.
Or the attorney, yes. And of course, he's a representative of one of the two or both.
Right.
And, this is why, this is the line I think that needs to be drawn here, of where, and I don't know how, frankly, you would be that definitive with your legislation or your act as such. But I think if there's a showing of bad faith,
This is what we're getting at.
That's what we're talking
then,
about.
we're really talking
at that
about.
point, I think they should be assessed with it. Now, of course, you've got your provision now, and you go all the way to the Supreme Court and appeal and everything, that they're assessed with interest and penalty and all that, you know. But, sometimes, my lord, even you get the Supreme Court, what have you got? So, that's what you face. But I think at that point, I would say that they should have to pay it if there's a deliberate, you might say, breach of faith or bad faith.
This is what I was ready,
This is
I
what we're
won't
really getting
take
at.
much time, but just, last week, we had, I had to help a man. I'll cut it real short. He hurt his, he thinks he hurt his back on the job. He went home and later went to the doctor, and the doctor said he thought he hurt it on the job and so forth. He filed under workman's compensation. Make a long story short, after about 2 weeks of treatment in one hospital, they couldn't do anything for him. They sent him to another, to a specialist. He was operated on for ruptured disc. He's out, a little over 2 months. The insurance company, this other company on workman's compensation, turned him down, said he didn't hurt it in the shop. Now, it's kinda unique in that, he does draw the full amount, 63. If he hurt it on the job, we have a contract in there, if he hurt it on the outside, he draws 95. Plus he gets all his hospital bills paid and everything. So why would a man say that he hurt it in the plant and lose $32 a week? Now, they had the investigation, and after I got to digging into it, I called workman's compensation and called insurance company too, and got digging into it, and they said they turned him down after they had investigated it. And I checked with the 3 doctors, the company doctor that he went to, and then the other 2 doctors that he went to, and the insurance company hadn't talked to any of the doctors. I said, who did you talk to? He said, well, we talked to and he liked to slip. He said he finally said the people in the plant, and he started to say the people in the office. Finally I got the word, though, just what the word was, that if we didn't like the decision, that we'd have to get a lawyer and do something about it. Now, we had done took up $1,200 for this man to keep him from starving. That's it. His wife didn't work, and he had I believe 3 kids. He'd been off 2 months, and he was just literally starving. And so we had to take up money to pay to keep him from starving. And then they was trying to get him to lie about the thing when he was truthful about it. And of course, I'm not worried about that, because this plant's organized and we can take care of it. But the people that's working in these unorganized plants wouldn't have a thing in the world to go with. If he took this to a lawyer and got 25% of it, think what it would do, the law and I'm not complaining about 25%, except this man just gonna get $63 a week while he's off, and he just gonna get his hospital bill paid and everything else, because he seemed to be coming along all right. In fact, the doctor said he'd go back to work on light duty, but the company don't let nobody go back to work on light duty. But if you take 25% of that off, it's got to come out of the hospital bills, the doctor bills, or this measly $63 a week. And it's just gonna kill him.
Well, this is what I think he's already said.
Now, if I could
Well,
even
litigation
see-
is
yeah.
forced and like
I
this.
could see a borderline case maybe of them doing this, but when it was so obvious, that I asked the insurance company, I said, why would a man lie that he heard it on the inside when he's gonna draw $32 more if he heard it on the outside? He said, is that a fact? I said, yes, I can show it to you in the contract. See, they didn't check nothing. They claimed they made a survey and checked on this and investigated, and they didn't check nothing. In fact, the doctor, boy, he wrote him a letter. This man's a family doctor wrote him a letter and burned him up. He said he was really disappointed in them that they didn't even check with any of the doctors before they turned this thing down.
Well,
But this is the kind of thing, all I wanted to bring out was this is the kind of thing that's happened, and it happens more often than the average person thinks it does.
You have to be involved in it. I had a case, not along this line, but along the line you mentioned, as well as what you said here on the freedom of selection of a doctor, where a client of mine went first to the company doctor and just more or less dismissed as a light thing, and he took it upon himself to go to another specialist. And then the complaint was made by the carrier that he didn't give notice to his employer, about doing that. Says they didn't know anything about it. Well, he called my client as an adverse witness. A little feller who hurt his leg and dragging it about like Chester on Gunsmoke, still is hurt. Forced him to a hearing on it. Problems like to talk about here. But the trouble with my client was smarter than the lawyer for the insurance company, fortunately, because it scared him to death. He didn't know what an adverse witness was, but he'd already been on, and I got him back there and just told him to tell the truth. And he did. And it shows how the truth often helps and does. There's no substitute for it. He came out, the lawyer asked him, said, well, you didn't go back to the plant and tell them all about this. Yeah, no, but said my daddy did. And he says they sent me some flowers. So the referee turned to the lawyer and said, you just went to the well one time too many to drink, didn't you?
Well,
He didn't
I
ask me
can
more
tell you,
questions.
I don't wanna take up any of your time.
sympathy with him at least.
I can tell you some just about unbelievable stories on this company doctor deal, including myself and everybody else, but, I think you've got
Well,
pretty good idea.
you've, I think, done an excellent job of speaking to some of the problems that we are talking about here, Tom, as you can. If we can, I'd like to go to the next one on unemployment insurance. That, of course, is a very important matter at the present time, especially up in your neck of the woods, so to speak. You probably have more unemployment in northeast Mississippi than any place in the state. And you know, $60 a week don't buy many groceries. So speak to that. What'd you say?
I said, that's just in Theodore Smith's home, Ken.
No, not just in his, not according to the figures. Of course, his county is worse, I admit.
Well, he's 24%, I believe. Well,
Right.
it's a problem all over this state, and of course, we have it there, particularly with your seasonal type things
Right.
that depend on this shaky economy now.
Right.
I agree with the proposition as stated right here in this proposition 5 here. I don't know what you mean by your unfair disqualification provisions. I know that's somewhat nebulous in general.
Right.
I'd have to know what you mean to that to qualify my positions to that.
Well, we're
But,
thinking about the, Tom, you perhaps, not ought to speak to it.
There's a section in the law, Mr. Littlejohn, that uses the word misconduct. This has been abused
from A to Z. For instance, just give you one, cite you one situation, or one kind of situation. As the law is written now, when a union has an organizing campaign on a factory, a plant or something, sometime during the course of that campaign, the company will discharge one or more employees, and they'll put on the record, for the purposes of notifying the Employment Security Commission, misconduct. In case after case after case, that misconduct turned out to be the fact that they signed a union card, they attended one or more union meetings, which is strictly a violation of the cotton picking law. Then the referee, they will turn them down, they will disallow their unemployment compensation. Got to go to a referee, the referee will sustain the office, the local office. Most of the time it'll go all the way to the commission itself, it's still denied because of misconduct. Well, we go back to the National Labor Relations Act that you quoted in your opening statement. This person had a right. There is nobody can prove that that person misbehaved themselves, was guilty of misconduct in the plant, on the job, but yet they're denied their unemployment. For one reason, they was active in an organizing campaign.
Well, let me say this to you now, connection with that. Most of the cases we're familiar with, they eventually wind up winning a case, the guy collects, but the problem here is the fact of this delay, and it goes on, you see, and in the meantime, this guy's not getting any grocery money. He eventually will win the case, but it's our union representatives follow through. But the problem is that drag out, that long period of time, and he's not getting a penny. He just cited you one example. The other one, of course, is the waiting period thing too. A guy, when he's out of work, he needs grocery money, and this is what we're talking about.
Well, I understand what Mr. Knight is referring to here. Of course, I think you'd be ultimately successful in the Supreme Court with cases.
Yeah, well, the cases, but
Well, as you pointed out, maybe he starved.
2 years later, you might be. See, this
that's the problem, is because of that ambiguous phrase of misconduct, and it means a lot of different things to different people. It's misused, that's what we're saying.
You have a simple
I got
sub-paragraph to that section, that's one of you, 7 grounds for denial of benefits now in your present statute by.
Let me give you one other example.
Not be ground for it.
I know I talk too much, but let me give you one other example. We have a plant up in North Mississippi where we tried about 8 or 9 elections before we finally won over a period of 15, 17 years. And so after we won the election and I was chairman of the shop committee, I went in to get some information for arbitration cases, what we was having, and I asked for some information in the file, and the personnel director made the mistake of pulling that man's file and sorting it out on his desk to hunt the information up, and I seen all these write-ups in there, He had a thing, it was that thick on this man, see? So I asked what all this stuff was in his file, and they said that's personal and all this stuff, and we had a clause in our contract that if you had a reprimand of some kind and didn't have another one in a year, why it'd be pulled out. So to make a long story short, I filed a grievance after I went to arbitration saying that they were holding these things in this file and it was against the contract and wanted to pull out. So after a long debate, we finally won. And to prove that they was pulling them out, 3 of the committee was to sit in there and watch it. Well, let me tell you what we found out. This one, you know him, J.W. Abrams, which did a lot in organizing that plant and everything, and is a real good man, a good worker. You could tell when every campaign we had, he was a good worker. They put reports in, ever so often, every 6 months in this man's file. Well, as long as there wasn't a campaign going on, he was a good worker and he was doing, just everything was fine. But when that campaign come along, he was no good at all, you know. And as quick as it's over, here he'd come back in there again, good worker and everything else. And you could go through that man's file without even mentioning union and tell when every campaign was going on and when the election was over, but just looking at the write-ups in his file. And this is done all the time. I mean, it's nothing unusual, but boy, they really stacked his full.
That's what we're getting at, Thomas, is that kind of stuff, you know. Of course,
I'm
you've already
familiar with it. I
spoke
went
to
by a
it. You
man's
were-
house last night that I've known for all my life, going down to my daddy's. About 15 years ago, he engaged in that kind of activity, Mr. Knight. He was fired, blackballed in the county, and he has to work on a construction job outside the state, on the borderline of the state now to support a wife and 4 children. People have been taxpayers in that county and this state all their lives. And it hurt me at that time because there was nothing I could do about it. And I've seen this. A man has to stay away from his wife and children a week at a time, or 2 weeks at a time, in order to work on a livelihood. Just because, I know there wasn't any misconduct, it's simply because he attended one organizational meeting in the community one night at a plant at that particular time.
Well, you know what we're doing.
Yeah.
Let's see if we can get on to the next one, tax reform,
Might
Did
have
you
been that
use one,
machinist group up there, we had all the hell that was.
Well, on the matter of tax reform, of course, you are very much aware, I'm sure, of the fact that, through the sales tax and the state income, the average working person is paying through the nose in taxes. We'd like for you to give us your views on this matter.
All right, first of all, the sales tax. I'd veto any increase in it as governor of this state. Secondly, I would say, as far as the income tax is concerned, that I'm first of all opposed to any increase in taxes. I don't know if anybody running public office or not. But I'll be blatantly honest about it. I know it takes money to run state government. We had, of course, our corporate income tax in 1960 to 6%. We started reducing it 1/2 of 1% per year down to 3%, I believe, at that point, in order to attract industry. I think the records show that I voted for that at that time, because I thought that we needed some industry, and I thought maybe that would help. I didn't see it could hurt. We were in a stable situation financially in our state government. But before I'll vote to put another dime's increase of tax, either sales tax or income tax, on the average working man in this state, there's some corporations in this state that are gonna have to assume their proper share now. They've had a chance to grow up. And now it's time for them as adults to pay their proper share of taxes. This is where I wouldn't want it to the point that it would discourage industry from locating here, because I know the bad effects this has had in other states when it's prohibited. But it's gotta be competitive. I was the only candidate, and have been the only candidate in this race, to open the campaign at New Albany, saying that the first thing I would request would be the raising of your exemption on your state income tax from $6,500 to $7,500 for a married couple in this state. And this is still my position, it will be my position. And make up for it, if there's any loss of income or lack of it there, then these very corporations I've talked about would make up for it. Now that's simply, basically, that's my
Very
position.
good, you speaking our language, very good. Let's get on to the next one on the Davis-Bacon thing, and, let me see in a few words if I can tell you what the problem is, what we're concerned about. So this come to light, as far as we're concerned, recently in a kind of a vivid fashion. The last several years, the state's been spending a lot of revenue sharing funds out on the college campuses, as you're probably aware of, and building, know, new buildings. Davis-Bacon, prevails in this situation where federal funds are involved. But we have found that in several situations that, a number of buildings are being put up with just state funds. And there is no prevailing wage law in these kinds of situations, which means that the shoddy contractor, the unfair contractor, comes in with a bid just a little under the contract submitted by the guy that we'll say bidded on the other job. End result is that these contractors are getting filthy rich out of this kind of a situation at the expense of the working people. And in many cases, they bring in their workforce from outside the state. Thought I'd try to explain to you what the problem is in order you can address yourself to it. What we think, frankly, is that put this thing on an equal footing is that we need a state Davis-Bacon Act where prevailing wages ought to be put into effect on this type of structure. Would you speak to that?
Lord, I'd have to see, frankly, on a statewide basis, a pattern of, you might say, discrimination in this area before I would say that we were at the point that we needed the Davis-Bacon Act as such. I would like to think and hope to think that the matters you're speaking of here would be possibly temporary. Maybe I'm ill-advised on this. But at this point, I don't think that our situation is such as to require specific legislation in this regard. I think it merits a careful and a continuing perusal on the part of your building commission, as well as this is where a State Department of Labor could come in.
Well, of course,
to make certain recommendations or studies in this regard to the legislature. Correct?
Building commission might well have that authority. We're not too sure on that. We think perhaps the building commission itself could set down these kinds of criteria. But my information on this came from a member of the building commission. Matter of fact, the state senator. He didn't know what he was doing at the time, but I posed a problem. He proceeded to tell me how the building commission was handling these kinds of situations. I'm not so sure, but what the building commission itself could set the criteria without legislation. But we did want your views on that.
They could set this forth in the contract before they ever award it.
Well, as governor of the state, you would be appointed the building commission. And you'd be a prime mover in this area. And I think what we want to know out of you as governor of the state, would you exercise the influence of your office to help rectify the problem is perhaps what we really want to know.
If that problem existed, I would.
Well, we was just talking about the birds on I-10.
Right.
Well, this T.L. James, of course, does all the shag pines work out of Louisiana.
That's highway
Now,
construction he's talking about.
yeah, he builds highways up to the Louisiana line, up to the Mississippi line, paying his people because Louisiana makes him pay them $6 and $7 an hour. He gets over Mississippi and he pays them $2.50 to $3.50 an hour, and the per mile of highway in Mississippi is costing as much, if not just a little bit more, but he's working our people for half wages and carrying the money back to Louisiana with him. And this is the type of situation we're talking about. It's not right to the Mississippi taxpayer or the citizens. Well, that's citizens of the thing, state taxpayers, and it's just not treating them fair for some guy to work on a company that's working on the same project in 2 states and paying our people half as much as they are in the other state, and it's costing us just as much to get the roads built.
We got problems out there, Mr. Littlejohn. A lot of people are getting rich out of the situation. Money is being spent on kickbacks and everything else when it ought to be going into pockets of people doing the work.
In other words, they don't enter their bids as low as they're gonna pay the wages. They'll enter just enough to get under that fellow that's paying the prevailing wage, and then they'll pay half that and pick up the difference. It don't cost, it's not saving the state any money to pay the employees cheap wages is the point we're trying to make. And you can have a man, say it's a carpenter on a job, he's working on a college campus on a federal building that's got federal revenue sharing funds, and he'll get one rate, he can finish that job, go just around the corner and start on one building to the state and get paid half that.
This is what we get now.
His skills is the same on both jobs, but the pay's not.
And it's not saving us any money, that's the thing, you know, if we were saving, $500,000 on a $2 million contract, you couldn't argue, but where you're saving $2,000 on a $2 million contract, what the hell, you know? The people would spend it back in Mississippi, and we'd be getting it back in taxes anyway.
Let Mr. Turner speak to us for a minute, he's a building trade,
Bring it
he was
close
in
to
this
home,
cement
you know, the
finish.
highest kind of jail you had out here being built with, revenue sharing money. And also the scale of where it was predetermined, daily vacancy. Our fire contractors bid this job to pay the prevailing wage scale. A non-union contractor bid the job knowing he wasn't gonna pay the wage scale, so he got the job. Now I went to talk to the building commission, and he sent me back to the county supervisor saying the county supervisor was responsible for him paying the prevailing wage scale because the money was allocated to the county supervisor. I go to the county supervisor and talk to them, and they said it wasn't our business what he paid on the job. And the law specifically states that whatever concern that this money is allocated to, they are responsible for seeing that prevailing wages are paid on these jobs that come out of the days of division. And what you do in a case like that?
Well, you see, here
Nobody's
again,
enforcing.
here again is where the absence of the Department of Labor gets in.
Nobody wants to take
This is what I
responsibility.
take care of the problem there, you have any legislation, it's a vacuum right now in the law, you have nothing to cover.
Right. So again, the Department of
We're
Labor,
just making
that's
a few
another
folks
role,
rich,
you see.
that's,
Yeah, I filed complaint after complaint, all the way up to Washington.
Again, where
As
they,
Gil Carmichael says, pardon that quote, but I use it sarcastically, that fellow's doing that's a capitalist. He believes in the free enterprise.
Yeah.
So do I. But
Well.
not to the extent, Carmichael.
well,
We had a vacant division, somebody been responsible to eliminate all this kind of stuff.
we need a Department of Labor to enforce prevailing
Some
wage
enforcement.
rates when, in situations where the law is there. You see, in this situation, there's no state agency to police the job to make sure they're living up to Davis-Bacon. See, that's another problem. You know, that's another different kind of a problem. Then we don't have a state Davis-Bacon Act where they have to pay the prevailing wage. Now, if we had a state prevailing wage law, we still would have a state agency to police it. So again, we come back to the importance of a bona fide Department of Labor to enforce these kinds of things. But you've addressed yourself to that. Let's get to the next one if we can. I'm gonna skip that one and, let you speak to the civil service thing briefly, if you would.
Well, this is
I think
a
you
pet-
understand what we're talking about.
This is a pet peeve of mine here. I don't call it civil service, I call it merit system. There's more legislative votes when you call it merit system than there is
Right.
civil service. 1962, I introduced the first merit system legislation in this state in many, many years. We got it out of committee, out of the Judiciary Committee with, believe it or not, good deceased late friend Thompson McClellan was even chairman of that. But I got it out with the help of one individual by the name of James Cleveland Coleman and another one or two who were on the committee with me. We got it on the floor of the House and we almost passed it in 1962. Statewide merit system for state employees. That was the end of it in that administration. Couldn't get it any further. In 1966, when I was in the Senate, I again introduced it there and got it out of committee and got it to the floor of the Senate. We lost it by 5 votes, passing in the state Senate. Now, that's the last time it has been resurrected. It came along in 1968, I believe, the year after I left the Senate. And they have passed what they call a classification commission, which was supposed to be a substitute for it. It was nothing but a stopgap for getting over the problem. In my opinion, the State Classification Commission ought to be abolished and a merit system set up for state employees. And you've got your advantages of this. You'll promote efficiency of state employees, I think, when you do it, because you're going to give them some job tenure and security. It won't be a washout every 4 years every time there's a new governor elected. You'll give some protection to the taxpayers of this state, making sure they get $1 worth of service for $1 worth of pay paid out in state salaries. So this is big business. You're dealing with 30-something thousand state employees now. And you've got to have economy in it and efficiency in it, but at the same time you've got to protect the employees. Now, we've got a lot of going on about reorganizing state government and all this. Well, this is true. The point I made in the first news conference when I announced this office was that admittedly consolidation and reorganization is good, but still there are some 30,000 state employees there that have got to be protected in such reorganization, consolidation, etc. We talk about, and it sounds good to the taxpayer, well, let's abolish this agency, let's do away with this board and this commission, and then we can save money. Well, that's true, because expenditures from 51 to 61, for example, and only increase in state government 75%, when you had a small number of increase in agencies. From 61 to 71, they increased 175% expenditures in the general fund. This goes to show it. But at the same time, if you're going to have any wholesale reorganization of state government, these people have to be protected. Those who are working there now, I'm not talking about the goof-offs and the deadbeats. You got some of those in state government. But a decent merit system would weed these out in due time. As quick as you political endeavors are getting them out now, maybe a little quicker. And in this respect, I think your merit system's a good thing, and I'm unequivocally in favor of this.
Well stated, well stated. Spoken with a degree of authority, I must say. I think you've spoke to it right down the line with the way we view the situation.
He's been talking real nice all the time, but when he mentioned Thompson McClellan, he just talking nasty now.
Well, we're not gonna
know that.
We're not gonna get on the dead now.
I've only mentioned that to point out the obstacles we had to overcome.
There you are. Now he understands. Okay, let's get on to the election law situation a little bit. Get your views on that matter. I think the thing that we're talking about here is that we're trying to come up with ways and means to get more participation in the election process. We think perhaps if the election's held on Saturdays, it would help. We're not real sure about it. It might be extending hours of voting might be the answer instead of Saturday voting. And then, of course, we talk about party restoration and a few other things. Would you speak to that for me?
First of all, as party registration, we might take these out of order.
Right.
I think there should be such in Mississippi. I think we ought to identify ourselves as Democrats, Republicans, and Independents and register accordingly.
Right.
I think, of course, voting is the fundamental process of a democracy. I mean, that's seventh grade citizenship. We learned that. It's a way to get people to do it. It's the problem. I'm not convinced that your Saturday voting is the answer.
We're not really sure.
I'm just not. I'm all for doing anything that can increase your voting of the average citizen, not to control voting.
Hours.
Perhaps the hours of voting would, if you extending your hours, particularly your working people that are going to and from the job.
This is what we're worried about. Right.
A lot of them don't have, they get off 30 minutes for lunch, they do well, they can get a sandwich. They don't have time to go wait in line at the courthouse at City Hall to vote, and they could, of course, care less. They work overtime, that person who has to work overtime that day, he done missed his chance to vote. So,
Commuters are.
Commuters the thing, you see, they get
Right.
in about the time they close.
So, possibly you're opening your election a little earlier, or at least extending a little later is your answer here. It would do well to try it on a pilot basis now. You recall that the district attorney's election in the First Circuit, in the special election that was held this past, some 2 months ago, when John Young was elected up there.
Right.
You had the election, I believe, on Saturday, did you not?
Right, this
So
is
was the
correct.
governor called this special.
Right.
I didn't see really any appreciable.
Light turnout.
It was a light turnout with a
Right.
special election, to be understood, but.
Well, the same thing happened down in the
Yeah,
Chantry
Chantry,
district a
two
week
Chantry
ago
judges.
today, and there was no.
It was
bar.
real light down there.
So-
In my box,
Saturday, you
it's
might be
3 hours
correct.
between votes.
We're not committed to that, but we did want your views on it, and, apparently you
People
feel
like to
about
vote
like
for
we
board of
do.
supervisors and sheriffs.
Well, he has addressed himself to, I think, to the pertinent matters of that.
Right.
He's for restoration by party. He answered that one. Can we move to education a little bit? We've got a number of things outlined there, but we're concerned about a lot of things that don't show up there also. Frankly, if we do justice to the problems of education, we'd have to do a brochure on just education. So don't limit your remarks to what you see there. Feel free to comment.
All right, let me first, by way of a little bit of background, if you'll pardon the intrusion on your time. Public education has been a concern of my family for many years. My family has taught school for almost 3/4 of a century in this state. My father quit in the late 40s when he said they let him carry a gun back in the schoolroom. That's when he returned, so he went back since. But he was one of the old stern disciplinarians. But particularly on my mother's side, there's the Speck family has been in the teaching profession for many, many years. My brother-in-law is a school principal, my sister is a school teacher, my wife is a former school teacher, and we go on and on, but I know you're not interested in the biography of my family. I mention that only to state this, though. That public education, had it not been for it, I wouldn't be here today. I favor compulsory school attendance law. I made this in my announcement when I announced for governor on the 26th of March, and I've been unequivocal about that. I don't have any reservations or limitations like Mr. Carmichael in the 8th grade. I mean, the man either gets an education or he doesn't. As to the issue of teacher salaries, I've joked with my brother-in-law that he's the highest paid part-time worker I know, because he's off now for a 3-month vacation, when in fact he's not, of course. Actually, he's working during the summer, but this is in joking fashion. I think we made progress in this area in providing teacher salaries. I think we need to continue this, because we're still at the bottom of the ladder in this regard nationwide, national average. But I think that this last session of legislation went a long step forward. Now I think the time has come for us to reevaluate our whole system. Not so much just with teacher salary pay increase. This has got to be kept in line and continued emphasis on this. But I think we've got to look at our total educational program in the state. This is where you may disagree with me, and if you do, we'll just have to disagree. But this is where I think we need to have a 9-man appointed State Board of Education, a lay board. Now, Al Summer or Heber Ladner and Dr. Johnson are all good men, I suppose, but they're not educators to the extent that they have the time to serve on a State Board of Education now and develop a 20th century modern educational program for the state. I think we need somebody, a 9-man Board of Education appointed by the governor, confirmed by the Senate, 3 members from each Supreme Court district in this state, of lay board members. I'm not talking about politicians and just political payoffs, but I'm talking about people. This is why I think the Senate ought to have to confirm them. Then you won't just have a bunch of political cronies appointed by the governor. These should be appointed on a staggered term basis to give some continuity and stability to our educational system. And then I think you could have a long-range planning program for our educational advancement in this state. We've been hitting it stopgap, hither and yon, to and fro, too long. It's amazing to me, really, that we made the progress we have. But I think the time has now come for a reevaluation. I'm familiar with the education study committees made back in '62. I was on the House Education Committee at the time it was made. And some of the efforts that were made to follow up on some of those studies, even when I was in the Education Committee in the Senate 4 years later. But I think this is where we've got to take a look at our vocational training program in our high schools, junior colleges, and so forth. We've made progress here, and I'm proud to see it. But the total concept has got to be in meeting the needs of our children as well as our economy, and to upgrade our whole standard of living here. It's not to make a trade school out of an educational institution, but it's to make that child, give him something to work with when he gets out. Not all of them are going to want to go to college. But when they get out of high school, they need to be equipped to try to start making a living if that's what they want to do. And make a decent living, a good living, if possible. If they want to go on to 2 years of junior college, I think we need to continue to coordinate our efforts here in the vocational aspects of your training. And in this way, we can assure a continuing manpower resource for industrial development, for better wages, for better standard of living, for higher per capita income, for more taxes to be paid, because they've made more. And in this respect, I think we need to look at our whole educational system. I'm not talking about a revolution in it. I'm not talking about a radical approach to it, but I'm talking about a realistic evaluation of where we sit here, and I think this is one of the areas that we can develop. I hope I've spoken basically to this, but any question I'll be
Yes, sir, I think you've done a real good job of speaking to the overall situation, Mr. Littlejohn. The statement you made about the Lay Board of Education, we are in basic agreement with you on the fact that we perhaps need a Lay Board of Education. Our concern, of course, is how we go about selecting that Lay Board and who's going to make the initial appointments. We have some real reservations about appointed boards, some of our past experiences. Of course, we had the right government and had some means of making sure that this Lay Board of Education was truly representative of the state's population. I don't think we could disagree with you on that too much, but our problem, is with an appointed board where it's stacked similar to what the college board's been.
I can
You
understand that, and that's why I say it ought to be confirmed with the Senate. At least you'd have some airing of it, an opportunity for
In other
organizations
words,
like
you're
yourself to
saying that
speak
they ought to
to
be
these.
confirmed by the
Yes,
Senate?
I think so.
Okay.
And put them on a geographical basis, at least you got three
Right.
from each geographical region in the
And
state.
they'd be appointed on a staggered basis. Any questions of him on this, in this area while we're on that subject of public education? I think he's done a pretty good job of addressing himself to our concerns at least. Well, if not, another question from a member of the committee, we'll leave that one and get on judicial reform. As a practicing district attorney, I'm sure you're well versed on the need of reform within the court system and so forth. And I guess I should say that when this thing was adopted, the legislature had to get acted on the constitutional amendment dealing with the JP system. So remember that as you address yourself to it.
All right, as Claude mentioned, your last session, the legislature touched on this matter of just peace reform and providing for additional education requirements for the holders of this office. I think the answer to this would be found in a proposition which has been advanced by one of your study committees of the Mississippi Young Lawyers Group, and to which I have committed myself as of yesterday, and that is this. the governor of this state, I would appoint a governor's commission on judicial reform, which would be a continuing type thing throughout administration, to make the necessary studies in these areas with some authority there to positively recommend concrete recommendations or suggestions to the legislature. Now, I made it perfectly plain in that position that I was not in favor of removing the election of judicial officers from the electorate. I am not for the appointive system of appointing your judges. And maybe this is wrong, but I have a basic feeling here that I think the judiciary, just like the legislative and the executive, ought to be responsible to the electorate. This commission could, I think, perform a continuing function in your judicial system and modernizing it. There's no question about it, we're dealing in an antiquated system now. I've seen juries have to come to a courthouse and sit there for day in and day out, missing their work, some of them losing money in the process, working people of this state, good solid citizens, and yet have to sit in the courtroom and maybe wait a whole week. This is what disgusts them with our judicial system. We need to have a system that would move in accordance with the 20th century. Right now we move in the 19th century.
Amen.
Now, these jurors perform a valuable function sitting there. You'd be surprised how many cases are settled simply because the lawyers know that sitting out there is a jury of 12 men and women ready to hear them. And maybe, because sometimes they don't want justice or a verdict. But that settles a lot of cases, and it results in a lot of saving of cost to the county. It saves the county, but it doesn't save that man who's having to sit there and think about his family at home and his job that he's missing, unless his employer is kind enough to make up for his pay in there and his difference. Now, we made some progress in paying the jurors what they're entitled to have, well, $15 a day, I believe it is now, but that's not enough to start. But that's better than $8 we used to have.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah, if they pay us 15.
Well, somebody's negligent in the duties or they'd be paying it. This is where that I think we can make a start here, and I'm not opposing any reformation as such, because I know how slow the courts act and how slow they are to perform. But I've seen it as a district attorney. I've seen for example, up until 3 years ago, your grand juries couldn't even meet except at term time of courts. All right, what happened? You have 2 weeks by statute in the average county in Mississippi for a term of court. We come in with the grand jury on Monday, usually it'd take 2 days with the grand jury. Wednesday, the time you got your cases out, and all this in, it'd take you all day on Wednesday, getting your people in court, so to speak. Thursday, you take up motions and so forth that are filed. Friday, well, everybody's done tired and ready to quit for the week. All right, you've got 1 week shot. With the passage of your constitutional amendment, allowing the grand juries to meet between terms of court, the judge can call them in session now. We can meet in advance of court. The district attorney and the county attorney not worried with lawyers pulling the coattails. What about bond for so-and-so? What about letting me plead this fellow and get probation, all that stuff. We're at the courthouse. We're there with the grand jury and the witnesses and the officers. We can present those cases, say, on Tuesday or Thursday and Friday, or Wednesday and Thursday, the week before court opens. We can have all those indictments in the hands of the clerk on Friday. They can issue the cases. The officers can pick them up on the weekends. Monday morning, we're ready to call the criminal docket. We've saved a week of court. That one change has helped us more than anything I know in the last 3 or 4 years. This is the type of thing that a continuing commission on judicial reform could continue to recommend and point out.
Very good.
Now, this is what I'm talking about in this area.
Mr. Littlejohn, could I ask you this question? Do you think that the JP courts really perform a function, or are they just a drain on the taxpayers?
I think they perform a function tonight.
You do?
Maybe you think, well, I'm in the 19th century, but there's something about the justice peace system that it needs to be upgraded. This legislation, this past session, will help do it.
Right.
We passed some when I was in the Senate that would help do it. That's brought a little more dignity to it and intelligence. I'm not for having court out in shade, under a shade tree and this type of thing. Or lining up the highway patrol down the road and get them all to come in a service station and pay the ticket, you know, it's been prearranged with the JP and patrolman. I don't, this is not my concept of justice. There ought to be dignity in the court, and this, for example, in our, pardon the personal reference, but in our own county of Union County, we've tried to bring the justice of the peace into the courthouse. If there's a trial, put them in the courtroom, have a trial, give some decency and dignity to it. And then a person, be out of state or in state, be young or old, rich or poor, black or white, he feels like he's had his day and he's had his say in a forum that knows what it's doing, and not just doing it for votes. Now, I know there's abuse of this system, but there's an abuse of every system, as long as human beings operate it, and I hope we continue to operate them. But this is where I think this very commission I'm talking about could continue to see these areas. And this court is basically, you'd be surprised how much actually a justice of the peace court saves the county in the long run, saves a circuit court in cost to the county when you get down to your specific question here. I say that without condoning some of the abuses that I know have been perpetrated through the justice of the peace court system.
You think we eventually ought to come to the place where a justice of the peace should be an attorney?
Well, not necessarily. I think he needs training. But all attorneys don't make good judges.
Well spoken.
So, there's a lot of common sense, thank goodness, outside the legal field. And that's, after all, keeps us going. But at any rate, I think that now if you get into if you're talking about an intermediary court in between them tonight, like a county court, I say definitely you've got to be an attorney, because your rules of evidence and everything. But a justice of peace per se ought to have better educational qualifications and certain standards. But I wouldn't go so far as to say that he's got to you've got to be an attorney.
The fact is, now, we've got some holding the office that can't even find their way home, you know, if they
That's
turn
correct.
around twice.
Yeah.
This is the abuses I'm talking about.
We are not trying to rush you, but we are running short of time, and I think you spoke to this as well. I'm not gonna let the members of this committee tell you about the expenses with these JPs.
Let me tell him mine.
Well, he's done spoke to your situation already. We're running out of time, and I want to get through a couple of more things, because I'm sure he wants to express himself on a couple of more things.
You didn't ask that day.
The governor's succession thing, would you like to speak briefly to that? Whether or not a governor should be allowed to run for the second term?
I think he should be. If he's worth being elected once, he's worth letting the people have the right to say whether or not he's fit to stay in.
That's enough said on that subject. You want to spend a little time on the need of ethics in government, or
Well,
do you think we need any such thing?
well, definitely, I think we need such. I think there needs to be more ethical persons and ethical legislation, or ethics legislation. You can't, it's hard to legislate morality and honesty. You can have the best laws there are in the world written on the books, and you don't have, you've got a bunch of thugs and crooks enforcing them or living up to them, you ain't got anything. So, I think there should be standards, sensible standards, imposed by legislative enactment as to this, but you can go to the point or the extent that you can discourage honest people serving and seeking in public office. I mean, after all, they don't have to do this. And you can overdo the thing, and sometimes I think we almost do that. We've nearly had an overreaction to Watergate, as bad as that's been. I deplore what happened in that. But, as a result of it, we've had some constructive reaction. But here again, you've got to apply the rule of common sense. And this country, this system survived, and the very strength of that system brought out the fallacy of Watergate. So let's don't throw away a system that's existed for 200 years, that's brought this country to where it is with all of its faults, but still strong enough to bring out something as bad as Watergate was. So let's don't, in my opinion, put so many restrictions there that an honest man can't serve, but or be discouraged. And I don't think any ethics legislation would do that, but you can go overboard with some of this. You don't mind.
Well, I think you've addressed yourself quite well of that one. I could spend quite a bit of time with you on the ethics bill that was adopted, you know, two different bills, and where some of the things you place your concerns about wound up in that legislation, but I'm not gonna use up your time. I want to get to the next one, because here is an area that we think needs a lot of serious consideration by the next governor and the legislature, because we're convinced we spent a lot of unnecessary money, especially with the A&I board, and that perhaps the A&I board as presently constituted has served its purpose. We'd like you to speak to this.
All right, the basic function of the A&I board, of course, as you all know, is to attract the industry in this state, assist communities in locating industry in the city. The first thing that's wrong with it is the way it's appointed and constituted. And again, maybe this is a rehash of what we talked about earlier on the other, but in my opinion, the A&I board ought to be appointed by the governor on a staggered term basis. Every 4 years, we've got a wholesale clean out here. I mean, it's inevitable, because the A&I board is the political packing group where the governor who wants to put his men in puts them in, whether they're qualified to attract industry or not.
Right.
Now, industry itself, I'm no industry man. I mean, I don't propose to be a smart businessman, but I've got little enough sense to know this, that there has to be some continuity, some stability in industry for it to operate, for it to function with a profit motive in mind, and we all know that's what it has in mind. You can't throw out a board of directors of a corporation every 4 years or every 2 years and replace it with a completely new group, some of whom don't know what they're doing, and expect to have much progress in the conduct of a private business. To me, the same principle applies in the attraction of state industry. To me, an industrialist would look at, well, how much politics is there in the A&I board? How much stability is there? What kind of policies am I to expect at the end of 4 years or 2 years? I say this and predicate it on two basic things. One is your present Mississippi Game and Fish Commission. Back in the late 50s and early 60s, there was a constant turmoil here in that agency because it was thrown out every 4 years. In 1960, and this was one area where the governor at that time wanted to rewrite the whole thing and fix it really to cover all of some of his appointments. But I wrote an amendment in that act then that put the Game and Fish Commission on staggered term basis. I think you'll all recognize or realize, if you're familiar with the Game and Fish Commission before that time, it wasn't a case of turmoil. There's been some stability put to it and a little dignity since then. We put it, for example, as just a little, as a mini merit system. If you'll examine that statute real closely, where a supervisor, a game warden supervisor, has to be selected from among some of the game warden in his area based on his merit and so forth. I put that amendment in there and slipped it through and got it passed. This type thing is helped. And I think it was, in 1966, we did the same thing with Mississippi Forestry Commission. We set them up by districts in this state for the whole state to be represented. In the 7 forestry districts, we incorporated those in the statute. And we put them on a staggered term basis. And I don't think anybody questioned the role that forestry has played in the economy, the manufacturing economy of this state. I think it provided some incentive there for stability, continuity. So this is where I think the A&I board that's appointed on a staggered term basis and again confirmed by the state senate, those appointments made, and also, of course, the provision of the law now is appointed geographically, but really that's a misnomer in a sense. But to appoint your board from geographical areas, be it Supreme Court districts, Highway Commission districts, or what have you, or congressional districts, so that all areas of the state would be represented. I think with this basic revision, I would favor the continuation of the A&I board, and with one particular reference, and that is with a division in it to specifically insist on their cooperation with your smaller towns and rural communities in this state on developing industry or attracting industry there. You've got a revolution in a sense here. You've got your new water system, your FHA water system's been installed in your communities. You've got almost a town within your rural communities now. A lot of working people live there. They've got their 10 acres or their 20 acres. They work in factories. They go to and from if they can get a decent road to ride on. And these people need a concern, and the A&I board, as I see it. And I think this has been due to a lack of frankly, leadership, and plus a lack of staff to go into these rural communities or your smaller towns and help them in the development. I represent one of the smallest towns in Mississippi, I guess. You ever heard of the little town of Blue Springs? It's so small it had lost its incorporated status in 1960, and John Kennedy got the census retaken and ended up with enough. But in the meantime, we had to change the law in Mississippi to provide that the municipality could have 95 people in it and still be a municipality. We had to make it retroactive, but we did. And Blue Springs is still incorporated today, but I don't know if anybody in the A&I board's ever been there. I mean, not that that's a monumental error, but I think it represents the trend in the whole state in this regard, and I just think that we need to move in that direction. Now, as for the overlapping, I think there is some. I think there's between it and the R&D center, but the R&D center can still perform a vital function with industry as well as with your towns and your citizens and your local political subdivisions, and providing the information, the in-depth studies that your towns and counties don't have the funds nor the personnel to really get the information that's needed there. And this is where I feel that this agency serves a vital function in there. I would agree that there's some overlap in there, but to that extent, I would speak to this issue that you mentioned.
Very good. Very good. We got a couple more things we want to get your response to. Mr. Dantin is out there. We'd have to see him next. We're going to take a few more minutes with you because we want your views on a couple of things here. You'll be appointing a lot of commissions and boards, and a number of them, and we've touched on a few here today, of great concern to us. We'd like to know, elected governor, would you confer with us before making appointments on these important commissions?
I would certainly do so. I would be more than happy to welcome suggestions of people of this state, and you don't overlook 90,000 people that are represented in making those appointments, particularly on those agencies that would directly affect the people of this state.
This is the one we're talking about now.
Referring to.
Right, well, we appreciate that. The next thing we want to get your views on is governor of the state. You'll be potentially head of the Democratic Party, of course. And we want to know if you've got any plans in terms of, solidifying the Democratic Party and taking a delegation to support the nominees of that party, or help and select the nominees of the party at the next convention. Would you speak to that, Bob?
I've already spoken to it in my speech at Scuba, if any of you noticed that.
Yes, I've
But I
been
thought-
reading about, you've been speaking to it, but,
The
won't
state
you
of
speak to this
Mississippi,
committee?
that it's time that we sought to reestablish our role in the National Democratic Party. I think the governor of this state is the one who'll have to do that. I would like to see us go as a unified delegation. I'd be happy, the governor of this state, to try to lead that delegation.
Amen.
My response would be, you might disagree with me on choices, and I think we all would, as to maybe who would be the nominee of the party. We all have our own individual, we're not to that bridge, but I'm saying that one of the first things to face us next year will be the very question you've asked here, and that's my position on it.
Very good. Tom, you wanna ask him the next one, or should I ask him whether if you don't win the nomination, you plan to support the man that does? We're talking now about if you don't win the nomination by the Mississippi Democratic Party as governor, will you support the man that does in November?
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, that takes care of that. The next question, do you want support of organized labor in the campaign?
Yes, sir, I wouldn't be here if I didn't. As your brochure said on the back, every vote counts.
Very well.
I told what Curtis, I told Curtis a while ago what we laughed
Yeah.
about, I said, you know, he answered these things so good, he probably don't want our support.
Well, let me see, Talmadge, speaking on behalf of this committee, again, we appreciate you coming. I want to compliment you on the way you have handled the questions. I think if it makes you feel any better, you have perhaps addressed a number of questions better than anybody appeared before this committee, which indicates you have a great knowledge of some of these violations. I want you to know I appreciate it.
I wonder
Good luck
if
to you.
I wonder if some of these folks who's been, they
Right.
didn't even understand some of the questions.
Well, we'll, take a brief intermission when we get to coffee. This way we want,
Give a little break.
Right, Mr. Dantin advises me he, is in a bit of a jam on time, and he, wanted to know if I thought we could get through with the interview by 1 o'clock, and I told him I thought we could.
Beautiful. That's what time I need to get through.
Well, so I told him that, we'd try, not to use too much of his time by ourselves, elaborating too much on some of the questions. And with the cooperation of the committee, we'll try to get through here by 1 o'clock, Mr. Danton.
Okay.
First, let me say on behalf of the committee, we appreciate very much you taking out time from your busy schedule to come out and, meet with us.
Appreciate the opportunity.
And, we hope that, when you leave here, you'll feel the time been well spent. Now, I mailed out, of course, to you a copy of our questionnaire of sorts along with a brochure. Give you an opportunity to, review the thing and more or less, be prepared for some of the questions. The opening, we have a statement there in the beginning about the collective bargaining process, what it's meant to the country and so forth. And then we ask the question, as governor of the state, do you think collective bargaining ought to be encouraged or discouraged in Mississippi? And specifically, what role should the governor's office play in the matter of labor management relations?
Of course, I think collective bargaining in all disputes should be encouraged of labor, but the exact role that the governor would play, I don't know of a role he would play unless it would be some extreme emergency that would affect the vital services of all the people of the state. But I would encourage collective bargaining as a solution to the problem. I assume we're talking about the private sector now, as
Right.
well as in the public
Right.
too.
We're talking about the
Yeah.
private sector there with that question. We will get to public.
Public later.
A little later, right. All right, with that statement, we'll move on into the brochure itself, and, what we'll do here is to give you an opportunity to speak to most of the points on there. Of course, we recognize that, most of them require legislative action.
Right.
And so forth.
Right.
and if the governor himself cannot, necessarily.
Would you like to take this each one at a time?
Yeah,
Let me tell you,
right,
I don't
we'll
think
start
it would-
with
I don't
it,
think-
right, so we're
like I said,
starting
I've
one.
already- You gave me a form and I filled
Right,
out, just read
okay,
it, and I can leave
right.
the written.
Yeah, I
response
wish you
to it.
would, if you
Okay.
would, right.
Well, number one, in dealing with amend Constitution, provide initiative and referendum procedure, there again, the governor would have nothing to do with it. As you know, it would take a constitutional amendment, and the governor wouldn't even have an opportunity to veto it. But I have no objection to initiative and referendums on principle. This question was asked to me in Hattiesburg at Retired Officers Association meeting. And it's the first time I'd been confronted with it, and I said, well, I just can't see any justification for it. That I was afraid that special interest group might take the initiatives and come up with special legislation that doesn't take into account the whole problem of spectrum of the state. But when I also said when I first started this campaign, I intended to do as much listening as I did talking, because I think I've learned a whole lot more from people than I would otherwise. So after that person had made this statement, I talked to several people about it. And several people said, well, you're wrong. Said it can be a very helpful instrument in such things that you're for, such as governmental reform. You might never get the legislature to do it, but by initiative and referendums you might can accomplish it. So I took another look at it, and I asked for this data, which I have not received. I'd like to see what initiatives and referendums have done in California. I know they have it in that state, and I don't know just exactly. I know they've had some just from general knowledge of what's taking place in the country, but I don't know the results of them, what the issues have been. I understand that this was done in Arkansas, and that it's been very helpful in Arkansas, and it's been a very useful instrument for government in Arkansas. And I asked for a comparison of the two, and I have not received it. But what was initially a response of not being in favor of it, and I don't appear to be wishy-washy because I'm not, but when I do respond to something, if I can be shown otherwise, I'm willing to take another look at it. So my answer to that would be that I have no objection on it in principle. I would like further data on the results in the states where it's adopted. But I'm coming off of the initial position I took on it, which was just off the top of the hat. Number two, establish a State Department of Labor. I have no objection to a Department of Labor if it is justified by a study of complete state government reform. Now, one of the things I have hammered most fully as in my campaign is I think we do need governmental reform for Mississippi. As you no doubt know, we have approximately 160 different state agencies. And nobody knows exactly how many state agencies we do have. We've had a number of studies. One was done by Brookings Institute in the 30s. Governor Coleman did some studies on the Constitution. There was a committee that did a study in 1969 at the end of Governor Williams' administration that I have read, and it's a good study, although the details are just not there. And what I would propose to do would be, as soon as the primaries were over, appoint, and I'm not talking about waiting until November, you just assume that you would win in November. It might be a big assumption, but I won't make it. And, but appoint a special ad hoc committee, nonpartisan. They wouldn't be people who were for me or against me. And I'd like to have input from all segments of our society, including labor, some political scientists, and a heavy representation from the legislature, to take these studies that have been made, update them, don't make another study, we've had too many, validate them through the services of the Research and Development Center, and come forward with a program with the results for implementation of state government reform. And I think it will result in at least 50% less state agencies. But I think the program for implementing state government reform should include in it a program for accomplishment. Some would have to be by gubernatorial proclamation, some by legislative enactment, and some by constitutional amendment. But project what would happen if you consolidate these two agencies. Are you going to lose 10-15% of your employees, and if so, how long would it take by attrition to accomplish it? Because I do not want to see government reform be an instrument for just cutting people loose without jobs. I think it should, I don't want to be in a position of the state firing a lot of people, but rather let it occur by attrition, And that takes planning and projections to do it, department by department. It means you're probably not gonna be hiring a lot of people. And most governors don't like to do that, but, I'm committed to what I'm doing, where I'll be perfectly willing. I'm not trying to build a big machine anyway. This is a one-shot affair for me.
Could I ask a question?
Yes.
If you can be shown where there is a definite need in this state for a Department of
I have
Labor.
no objections to it at all. I mean,
I think
that
when
doesn't
you
bother
get-
me in the least.
When you get through with your reorganization and with these studies that you're talking about, I think we can provide you with enough information
Sure.
to justify.
Well, I'd like to have your,
Right.
the ad hoc committee I'm talking about, I want labor input into that.
Right. Then, of course, you're gonna get into that 16 down there. We're not hung up on the name of the thing. We just need a department to provide the necessary functions of the Department of Labor. And we're not speaking about a Department of Organized Labor.
Mm,
That
I
seems to
understand.
be where the hang-up is with a lot of people. But you understand the need.
There's a lot of people in the state that's not organized, and there's a lot of federal labor laws and everything else, but these people don't know where to go to get help in doing something about it when they get hit by it. Let me give you one instance. I won't go into detail, but where the employer, and we have a few dirty ones in the state, we have some good ones, we have a few dirty ones. I'll say, I want you to finish this job. Well, his quitting time is none come, and he puts him on this job, makes him work 30, 20, 30, 40 minutes over, and never pays him overtime or anything else. That's a federal law that he's got to do this. But how does the average employee, if he doesn't have a union or nothing else, get the company to pay this? If they had a Department of Labor, we could call that, and it'd happen like this, and this is just some of it. I think we have some labor disputes that drag out way too long because we don't have a Department of Labor to handle the affairs that is, in fact, handle what the law says in the National Labor Relations Act and so forth.
We'll be happy to work with you in this area. And like
Well-
I said, I think we can provide you with enough input and enough information to establish a department, perhaps within another agency to perform this function. We're not, again, not hung up on just a department, so we can say we got a department.
Well, having a Department of Labor does not bother me. I mean,
Okay.
If it can be
All right, can
justified
we-
within it, administrative setup of state government.
Well, that's good enough. That's,
All right.
that's good enough.
You know, the other
Let's let him get
the other
to-
49 states
Yeah.
have one.
I understand that.
So I reckon if it's
Yeah.
good for everybody else in the world, should be good for Mississippi, you know?
I'd like to see us move more into mainstream.
Do you understand item 3? Do we need to get into that? with
I'm not
you?
sure that I think I understand it, but let me tell my position. I have no objection to public employee input, organization, or collective bargaining, with the provision that services to the public must not be disturbed.
Well, that you mean less strikes.
And, right. And it would also be subject to, that wage negotiations would be subject to final legislative appropriations. I mean, you could have collective bargaining with public employees, but if the legislature doesn't appropriate the money, that's the thing that bothers me.
You're thinking in terms of state employees.
I'm talking about state
And of course,
employees.
the major problem, the thing that we're thinking about city employees more than state, so the legislation as we visualize it, would provide, secret ballot election machinery like the National Labor Relations Act. Are you familiar with the National Labor Relations Act?
Vaguely, I've had a little
But anyhow,
experience in it, but
that act doesn't cover people in this category, and if the legislation is properly drawn, it would take care of all of these matters, plus provide a mechanism to resolve grievances and disputes in lieu of striking by way of arbitration. And the only time a group of people should be forced to strike would be because, say, a city government would not abide by the decision of the Board of Arbitration. Now, there's been some suggestions that perhaps a way to deal with this is in the courts. But this is what we're talking about. We share your concern about strikes on the part of policemen.
Well,
and
I'm
firemen.
committed to the proposition that a man who holds public office is indeed a public servant. That's the attitude that I'm going into the governor's office. I'm going into it with a sacrificial attitude that I'm there to serve the public. If I didn't want to do it, don't run for it. And I figure that should be true of everybody in government service. I realize that though when you get down into the echelons of people who are not working because of commitment to public service, but because they need a job, you've got a different situation there. And when I was
Sanitation workers.
right.
So you see, we
right.
got that situation in Hattiesburg, I'm sure you're aware of that one.
Right. But when I was mayor of Columbia, we had the option of workman's comp when it first came out, and we took it the first opportunity because I thought city employees needed it. And we had full meeting. It was a small town, but we'd meet with the police department, fire department. They could put in input with anybody that wanted to. And I think you'll note that we probably increased salaries of city employees during that 4-year period 50 to 60%, if not more.
Money is not the sole question.
I understand,
here.
job security.
So a lot of it here is simple recognition and the mechanism to deal with problems, and it's a matter of time, I think, before we get to it. It might
I think it's a matter of time, because I'm not for pushing the municipal or county or state employees into organizations if they don't feel a need for it.
Right.
But I understand there's some effort now, just recently, of state employees to go into some form of
That's something
organization.
going on out
And,
there, I'm not too sure what it is.
I'm not either.
It sounds like
It's
some
not
people-
any of our organizations.
Yeah, well, it doesn't
It's
bother
them.
me, I mean.
Coffee at the door, I believe, but
Is it? Yeah. I think before you take a cup of coffee, if it is, yeah.
Maybe background too, so you're aware, I was born and raised in Columbia, and I've worked all of my life. My father and mother were clerks in the store, and the store first at the Dantin company for 20 years.
And if anybody else wants coffee, they're gonna have to serve themselves, I ain't gonna serve you, so Betty, go right ahead, talk.
And I worked from the time of all type work. I worked in drugstores, I worked in cocoa plants. Dropped out my last semester in high school to work in the oil field as a truck driver to earn enough money to go to college. I had enough credits to graduate then. And I worked in the oil fields as a truck driver for 6 months, for $1 an hour, no overtime. And just as many hours as we could make, that's how much money to make. And I made $70 and $80 a week, so you know what kind of hours it was. And from that, I got enough to get started at school, and with the help of all my parents, who would, at that time, I think, in a Perkins store in Columbia was probably making, at that time, I'd say $35, $40 a week. They'd on up to $50. And the two of them together probably make $60, $70 a week, and they would send me $20 a week to go to school. So I know about working for people. I worked all my life. And then after I graduated from college, I went in the Marines and got the GI Bill. That's how I got to law school. So I've been raised with problems of the person who had to work. Now, I've worked in plants before. Now, since I've been out of college, I've been practicing law and been gradually building up my law practice. We have represented some management and some labor disputes. New Orleans Furniture Manufacturing Company. You need to know that because I did. At one time, after I was mayor, I was appointed as an arbitrator for New Orleans Furniture Manufacturing Company, and I forget who was arbitrator for the union, but he and I then selected the third arbitrator, and the company lost the case too. I hadn't been an arbitrator since. But that was simply because I was an attorney there in Columbia.
I served on an arbitration board for that outfit once myself.
And I forget who the gent was that represented labor, but we got along.
Well,
And the third arbitrator came from Tulane. Well, that's been my experience.
Let me just ask you, I noticed Claude, I know a lot of unions and everybody, companies like this arbitration board, but I can't, and nobody ever showed me any sense in it.
The 3-member board?
That's right.
The third one makes a
The
decision.
third one, you might as well take the
makes
third one and go
decisions,
home,
man,
because
hell,
that's what's gonna happen.
why don't we just take the third one and go on, because you
That's
know the
about right.
company's gonna rule for the company, and the union's
gonna
gonna
rule for the
use for
union,
the
that's
union, so why
absolutely
not put the one man on there and save money and go on?
That's
Well,
about
you
right.
talk to all these unions about that, I'm in
That's
accord
all
with
we-
you.
That's all we got.
That is the truth, I mean.
That's
that's
We
the
just
way-
use one man. That's
Well, let's
all.
get on
But since
over.
that time, we've had no, we've had no labor disputes, they've negotiated the contract without attorneys or anything, and that's been my experience in, except at one time, when I first started practicing law, a firm did represent a company in Picayune called Chemicals, and they did have a labor dispute, and it was organized. But I don't know what's happened to it since then. We did not handle it, they hired an attorney out of Houston. That's been my experience in labor from one side and then from the other two.
You wanna go to the next one on the workman's comp
Right, I'm
situation.
gonna
Do you
lump
practice
forward.
any law in that area?
Yes. Initially, my practice was representing the workman, and I have still occasionally. Lately, it's kind of generated into representing the carrier and the company. But my initial practice, I did a good deal of representation. I don't have an extensive practice, but a little. But my initial representation was with the workman. And in that connection, before I get to 4 and 5, I'm aware of the fact that what the law says of the composition of the Workmen's Compensation Commission.
Right.
And I do think that labor should have a valid representative on it. I do not recall who is even representing labor right now.
We could
But-
tell you ourselves.
But, you don't, not certain either.
Right.
But I think, Claude, I think the concept of the law was to have someone on like Claude Bruton, who was a genuine representative of labor. And I think labor's entitled to that. If I have the opportunity to make that appointment, I can assure you he will come from labor.
You know he's being buried this afternoon.
I did not know that.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate your statement on that. You've already answered the question
But-
we'll get to a little later.
On workman's compensation benefits and unemployment benefits, I realize they must be adjusted to the changing economy. They can't stay static, and what happens to the economy is the workman's got to be able to survive on it. I am not willing to commit myself to these particular proposals of 4 and 5 until a full study of the results has been made. I just don't know what it would be. I just don't know what it would cost. I don't know, I haven't heard the other side on it.
But you do feel that the benefits too
Because,
low.
yes, sir, they've got to be adjusted to enable man to survive.
Could we ask you how you feel about the man picking his own doctor? Employee picking his doctor. Now, we're not talking about if it gets to where, I just want to explain to you, we don't have any objections to the man after, if he goes to another doctor and the company says, well, there's nothing wrong with him having the company doctor examine him. This is not what the meat of the coconut. We're talking about where we think that the company doctor is not giving us service, that he is not even qualified or something else wrong, and I can give you some answers if you want to. Then
Yeah, I've
we
seen
want-
both sides of that. I mean,
We wanna go to
you know,
our
look,
own doctor.
Look, you get, because workman's compensation is more of a doctor's battle than a lawyer's battle.
This is it.
And there are company doctors, some doctors that won't give a guy 1 iota of, and then there are other doctors who'll give him 50% when he stumped his toe. And it's a problem.
I was talking about no basic.
You're talking about basically treatment.
Treatment in the beginning. And stay under the present law,
The employee gets to designate.
employee
who does the work,
designates
yeah.
who he has to report to and be examined by on the first shot out of the bat when he gets
Let me
tenure. This
just tell
is
you
where the
what-
problem is.
Just a short, what happened in the plant I came out of, and this is, I found, don't get me wrong, but we have a lot of good doctors, like we got a lot of good lawyers, but, the doctor
They
had.
do tend to go the way they pay. I'm aware of that.
But this is not the only problem. We have some doctors, for some reason or other, and I won't say what was wrong with them. We had one doctor that had been a company doctor for 15 years. He had come to that plant 2 times a day for 15 years. And we're sitting in a meeting with management in the conference room, which is over a block from the first aid room, and he comes in and he's completely lost, and where did you move the first aid room to? Man got his hand cut right in the palm of his hand. He took 3 stitches before they could stop him up near his watch band. Now, I don't know what's wrong with him, and I wouldn't say, but that doctor, and in fact, we were organized and we had enough power to say, well, we just won't use him now, there's no way. But I'm thinking of the poor person that's not, and I'd rather go to a veterinarian than go to him. In fact, this was a saying in this plant: if I get knocked out completely and I don't know what I'm doing, you fellas take me to the vet if you can't find nobody but this doctor.
Well, of course, that could be an isolated, I mean,
I know this is an isolated case,
yeah.
but this is
There ought to be a procedure for when that occurs, that something can happen. How about, if Workmen's Compensation Commission determine whether or not, designating in an instance?
Well, I go along with you there, but don't you think that a man that you have, it's just like, you know a little about law, I'm sure. Don't you think if you didn't have any faith in your law, you would you really think you got justice if you didn't have any faith in your lawyer? In the same way with medicine, if you don't have any faith in your doctor, are you gonna take his medicine? Are you gonna do what he tells you? I think it's really, we gave up our right to sue these companies for this, so I just think we ought to have the right to pick our doctor.
If we had to sue someone, we have a choice of selection of attorneys, and I think if somebody's gonna, operate on you and take one of your lungs out of something, you should have a choice on who's gonna do that too.
That's right.
Because it could mean your life.
Well, Mr. Dantin, the
See,
Congress.
the problem, I'm not ready to give you a commitment on it, but I think this, and this is radical, I think, if a man has to sue to get his benefits, and he gets them, that he shouldn't have to pay his attorney.
Well,
He
that's-
can answer
that's-
one of my questions.
Keep talking.
I was
was our
fixing to
next
ask that.
question. Especially, we're having some few cases, and I know that some I'm bringing up are really far out. We're having some few cases now where the insurance company is not even investigating and nothing, they just turn them down.
Well, I know that.
And,
I've
and
seen
the
both
case-
sides of it,
And
I
a case like
represented
this,
a lot of them.
the employee,
And you know, I'm well aware of what they do,
okay,
not just in workman's comp, but a man's house burns down, and he's got the company, say we, $10,000 coverage, we pay you $7,500. I got a total loss. Well, you have to hire an attorney, it costs you more than that, and I've had that to happen, I know.
Well, you're familiar with the problem. Now, let me say this to you, that the
Well, I'm
Congress
keeping
of
open
the
mind.
United States is perhaps, I know there's been, a number of studies made. I've got books this high over in my office on the studies on both workman's comp and unemployment insurance. I think it's just a matter of time before the Congress sets some minimum standards
For the
in both
nation.
areas, workman's comp and unemployment.
Mhm.
And that perhaps the next
Probably
session
should
of
be
the
done.
legislature will have to update our law to
Accommodate the nation.
accommodate it. And I'm sure you'd work with us to
No problem.
bring this about as governor,
No
right?
problem.
Well, can we get down to the matter of tax reform and get your views on that a little bit, the tax question?
I'm for a complete reevaluation of state taxing methods and results. I have committed myself to the proposition, I genuinely believe that the average taxpayer and a homeowner just simply cannot stand any additional taxes. I am for classification of property for ad valorem taxes. There is, I'm sure you're aware, an MEC program, Mississippi Economic Council program, for 100% assessment of all property. There was, as I recall, an act that was introduced in the legislature to provide for 100% assessment of all property across the board. And then to take a certain percentage for ad valorem taxation, 10%, 20%, whatever is necessary. I am just absolutely convinced what that would do would shift the tax burden from your utilities and industry to your homeowner and your farm owner. I believe that would happen. Now, they say if you went by classification, classifying homes as one property, farm owner, which would be just a small farm owner, saying, I wouldn't, not your big plantations, of course, but your agricultural, families on which we're so dependent on food, to where they just simply cannot stand any increased taxes. Average farmer generally can't. Give him a classification where it will be equal within his class, but will not result in an increase of home taxes or farm taxes. And I've heard it said that would perpetuate tax inequities, but taxes are inequitable, and they have to be inequitable. Income tax is the most inequitable tax there is, but it's the fairest tax there is. If we did the same principle on income taxes, we'd assess everybody's income at 100% and take a flat percentage of 10% or 20%. And where would we be if that occurred? And I'm thinking the same thing would occur if we did it with property. That the small property owner would just eventually lose it to the big property owner. So I am for classification, and when all 6 candidates, at that time 6, they're dropping along the way, spoke before the MEC, that was never brought up, and I brought it up and said, I'm sitting here in your midst, and I think it's going to be an issue that should be discussed this year, and here's how I stand on it. And got a couple of letters from some folks with utilities that didn't agree with me, but
Well,
that's how I stand on the tax. Now, I was asked this at Exchange Club in Jackson a week ago, 2 weeks ago. Bill Mine asked the question. He said most of the legislative leaders are of the opinion that we're going to have to increase tax. We have to raise taxes on account of the faltering economy. And I said, Bill, I don't think that's the approach. I think we should do everything to reduce government expenditures with government reorganization to prevent increasing taxes. That I just do not believe that we can go about it by property taxes. And I don't think we can increase any, certainly can't have any more sales tax. And nor excise taxes at this time that I see. And I think that our approach is we're not going to increase taxes. Well, later on I talked to him on the phone. I said, you know, I pretty well answered your question, although I didn't answer it. I said the approach is we're going to have to reduce. But his answer was, what if we can't reduce enough? I said, well, you can't run a state government in deficit. We can't do that in the state. We're not the federal government. We don't print money. We have to raise what we spend. And I said, I pretty well answered your question. There's not but one other way. If we come down to that, well, we have to raise taxes because we've pared down, we've cut out, and done everything we can do, and we still do not have enough money to operate the state. There's not but one source that you can get money in a situation like that, and that's income tax. And I don't think the average wage earner can take any additional taxes. So where does it come from? It's got to come from the top. Now that's how I feel about it, and I think that's the direction that I hope we don't have to raise any taxes. But I do think this. I think it was a mistake. 8 years ago when they reduced state income tax.
that's in the 60s on
In the 60s on Barnett.
when the corporate taxes.
Corporate taxes were reduced. And that's the most asinine thing I think we've ever done. It made a big play, but that didn't get us one industry. It made sounded good. But what you were simply doing, most of it went to pay. I mean, what they paid to the state government would have gone to the federal government in corporate taxes anyway.
Oh yeah, right. And it's happening now. Well, let me say this. Purpose of this interview is not to be argumentative with you on your position and on any question, but on this matter of equalization, I'd like to sit down sometime when you've got the time and go into some of the gross inequities that are out there and really get.
Oh, I don't disagree. There's
the
got
whole
to be. Yeah,
population.
okay. I agree with you, but I'm saying
Right.
within classes.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of room for debate in this whole
I
area.
understand that.
You know, homestead exemption, act itself, supposedly takes care of the small property owner. A person on a $5,000 value and 160 acres are exempt on homestead exemption. So we start from that premise. But I don't want to get into a lengthy discussion in this area with you, because this is a very complicated subject and we don't have the time. You
Well,
know, I don't wanna get.
I'm just telling you my ideas on it.
Yeah, right. I understand your
I'm not
concerns.
opposed,
Right.
I'm not opposed to equalization of taxes.
Mhm.
But I do not want it to be a tool or an instrument to result in increased shifting tax burden.
Well, we agree with that.
Claude,
Let's, yes.
excuse me, Dantin, I'm sorry, but I have to leave.
She's got a funeral she has to go to.
No, I'm sorry.
Be careful. Mayor, we appreciate you coming, girl.
All right, I'll be down for you. I'm very glad you had.
Nice to see you.
Let's get on to the next one, which is on the
Davis Bay, I have no objection to that. I thought that thing through and through, and it was put something down on the coast, and I wouldn't give any commitment
You've had
on it.
discussion down there with some of the building trades groups, have you?
Yes, sir, I met with the council down there, and,
So you know what we're talking about, what the problem is?
yes, sir, I understand what the problem is, and I wouldn't give a commitment on it. I said I need to look at it and see what it'll do, but the more I've thought about it, and I've really given a lot of thought to it. What you're simply doing is doing in state contract what you do when you have federal money anyway.
This is what we're talking about.
So I have no objection to that. I'm understanding, I'm not saying I'd get out and push it as a part of my platform. If the legislature will pass it, I wouldn't veto it.
Good enough. That's good enough. Mr. Turner, he's done answered our question in good fashion here. Mr. Turner is a building tradesman. I'm glad that you've been able to give this matter some
Well, I've thought about it a great
right.
deal, I really have.
Right, okay, that
And
makes
we're not
it
really,
easy.
I know it's probably who's gonna pay for it? It's gonna be paid for by taxpayers. I mean, that's
Well,
what it amounts to. And if we don't elevate
Right.
if we don't elevate the salary of the people who are building for the state, then how are we gonna get anybody else up to this standard?
Very
I know-
good.
Well, in some instances, we're not even sure it would increase the cost. What
Might not.
happens
Might not.
sometimes, an out-of-state contractor bids just slightly under and then pays half the wage and takes,
Well,
you know.
I've given it a thought, I know what it's all about, and,
Well, we appreciate your answer on that one. I appreciate the fact that you've had an opportunity to study the problem.
Well,
I
like I said, I
guess you're
wanna-
perhaps the only candidate we've talked to that has got into this one already. Now, the next
But,
one.
I've had, when I
yeah.
first talked down the coast, I said, well, I'm not gonna give a commitment, I just, it hit me cold, I didn't know what it would do, I wasn't really sure what we were talking about, but I have no objection. Number 8, men enact temporary disability insurance law. I need to have more information on this one before committing, I just
We're
really
not
don't know.
gonna spend a lot of time on
Okay.
that one because it's not one of our pressing issues.
Yeah, I
Most
just
of our
don't know
organized
enough
plans-
about it to say one
Most
way
of
or
our organized plans have took care of this anyhow, so we wanna get your views on the next one.
Men state civil service law, no objection on that.
You wanna speak to the next one, I guess.
Well, see, I wanna see all state employees, become, some have to be, of course, some administrative employees have to be appointed, but I'd like to see the A&I board employees, and many of these city employees. I don't wanna see us, take away our local government, but, my approach to many sheriff's departments is that many sheriff's deputies should be, on civil service and, on the merit system.
We talk about uniform civil service system.
Yeah,
I'm for that.
Yeah, I have no objection. I think,
Matter of fact,
I don't see the particular law when we look at it. I don't wanna see us go into a small municipalities that might have 4 or 5 employees and lock in, but that's not a merit system.
Right.
And someone said, well, what you're saying, a merit system is to take the incompetent and lock him in a position where, he can't be fired. And I said, that's not a merit system. That's not my definition of a merit system.
That's a demerit system.
Yeah, that's right. But I was asked that question by a reporter when I talked about
Yeah.
merit system for state employees. I think you have to start with the state first completely and then move into your local government. But the reporter asked me that, said, you mean you're for this system? I said, no, that's not a merit system, that's not what I'm talking about. Number 10. At this time, I can really give no commitment in support of this program, but I'll keep an open mind on it. I really don't know the need for this. I really, on number 10.
Well, just briefly, we can give it to you. Federal law that don't cover all the employees of the state. we got certain groups of people in the state that there's no law that says they gotta be paid anything. So like waitresses, they may be working for 50 cents an hour plus tip.
Yeah,
And there's no
clerks and
state
stuff.
law to give them any sort of minimum, salary at all. And like service station attendants, no law covers them unless they happen to be with a major chain and they admit operating a station. People like Exxon can come in and open a station under a local franchise deal and not be covered by the federal minimum wage.
You've got most of the clerks under this now, don't you?
In a limited way, not
Limited.
all of them. It's lesser coverage. It's not the full 210 minimum wage. It's like $1.90 or something, and they're gradually gonna come up. You know, it's a
But
longer
that'd be-
span.
yeah.
Yeah, but there are a lot of other people that's still left out, that's not covered at all.
All I say is I'll keep an
Right.
open mind.
Not only
Don't give
wages,
you-
Mr. Dan, but hours of work. you
Right,
know.
there's no
They're
regulation on
footloose to
overtime or.
Just do whatever they want to do.
James says 60 to 70 hours.
Right,
at
service station,
for
they would
60,
slot up work
$70.
12 hours a day, 6 days a week, some of them 7 days a week, and they may get, $60 or $70 for this, and that's all, with no overtime.
Everybody says they wanna raise the per capita income in the state, and these, I don't understand is these storekeepers, take for instance, say, I'll have to go out of business if I pay this. But if they pay it and the other storekeepers pay it, what are these people gonna do with this money?
They're gonna
They're gonna
spend
pay state tax and everything else on it, and they're gonna spend it right at them same stores.
Stores, you
So-
don't get it back.
So I can't see it.
Well, I won't give you a commitment, listen, I'm not gonna tell you something here that I won't say some other place either,
Right.
and,
We
We
appreciate that.
understand. Well, let's get your views on the next one.
I have no objection to improving the election laws, but I am not in favor of that last part particularly, about registering,
Parties?
by parties. I don't object to
You
them.
realize, of course, under the present setup that the Republicans vote in the Democratic
I realize
primary
that.
and might decide that you're not the man they want to
And
run.
they go in and vote the other way, but I don't think that happens too often.
That the possibility exists.
Well, I recognize it, and I
We've had
recognize
it.
in my particular situation right now that I would probably be the object of that.
Well, you see, this is, you could very well, find yourself,
But,
in that position.
I won't give you a commitment on that just yet. I might change my mind drastically after August 5th.
In other words, if we talk on August the 6th.
Honest man, I must say. Of course, on the election law on Saturday, we're not too sure this is.
I don't know either. I don't have.
What about
We just
extending
had, we just
the
had
hours
one
of
on
voting?
Saturday. Pardon?
What about extending hours of voting?
Yeah, I think that's good.
Instead of closing the polls at 6, run them to about 8, where these working folks would have a chance to
I have
vote.
no objection to that.
So you got a lot of people in your neck of the woods that commute back and forth to Lytton.
Sure
By the time
do.
they get back in, the polls are
You
closed.
all understood?
Right.
A judge election didn't necessarily bring out a.
It didn't turn out a lot, so I was just about to say, no, I don't know, I'm
Yeah,
not
if it'd been
tied to
during the week,
Tuesday
you
or
might not
Saturday,
even had enough
whichever
time to
we can show.
Well, if we
that.
get legislation, through over here to do a few things like that, you, as governor, I assume would sign it.
Oh, sure.
Would be doing it. You ought to get to the next one. I'm not trying to rush you, but you,
Well, okay,
told us
but
you
I've
were
listened, I've read this, and I know pretty well
Right,
what
okay.
it is. I mean, I did not only read it, I've studied and thought about it.
Right.
Public education, I have no objection to all that you say here. Of course, I have to put the qualification within the ability of the state to pay. And I think we all understand that, but I'm committed to public education, my children in public schools. They're in, totally integrated situations where we have 65% white and 35% black, or 60-40, it fluctuates. And, I think it's good education. I have no objection to a private school system. If they want to pay for it, that's a matter of individual choice. But I'm committed to public education, and I think we've got to have a strong public education system. Great deal more emphasis on career-oriented education. I think too many of our kids coming out of high school with diplomas and not able to make a livelihood, and I think we should put emphasis those 4 years. In that connection, though you don't ask the question, I do believe in compulsory education.
Yes, no.
Yes, we
Now,
do.
At the bottom, right
Do
down.
you really? I didn't
Yes,
know
sir.
that. Where's that?
Number
Last,
5.
number
5
5
on the
in
12.
that
Item
same
5 on the
category.
12.
right
Oh, I'm
Oh, I
sorry, I
see.
didn't notice that, okay. Now, I do think this, I don't know I think we need to, it wouldn't take long to do it, see what the impact would be on the system if we did it all of a sudden. It might not be any impact, but if it would suddenly throw a large number of people in schools without people to, without facilities or staff to handle them, it might have to be a gradual thing, start with the first, second, third grade and work it in. It might not have to, I don't know. I just don't know.
Well, I don't think it would, Mr. Dantin.
I don't know, it might not.
The problem here is not, most of the kids start the school or in school.
It's
at one
dropping
time,
out.
But they're dropping out, that's the problem.
This fifth and sixth grade.
Yeah, I
is,
understand,
you
I
know,
understand
and
that, I think, but I'm
And
saying.
then they get out and get in trouble. and
Well,
costs
it
us-
might not, I mean, it could well have no impact on the system, but I think we should know. But we suddenly pass a law, everybody has, and then we flood our school, our high school, our junior high school with an extra 300 students with nobody to handle them. And you're worse off than if you'd done it a little bit with plan. It might not be a problem, I just don't know. But if it is, let's adjust to it.
Let's look at it from this point. If it would be a problem to make it compulsory, it'd be a problem if all our kids just decided to go to school too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, that's no problem, I'm for it.
In other words, there'd have to be some type of survey run to make.
Well, I think you probably have that information now, I don't think it'd be hard to put that together, and make an estimate on what we're talking about.
an idea of who how many is out.
I think you pretty well addressed yourself, you pretty well in favor of the things that we've got done. Of course, if we covered the whole thing, we'd have to have a separate brochure on education, you know.
Yeah, well, of course, all of this is for good education, and it's a
Right.
goal we should strive for.
Right.
And I don't have I'm for a lay board of education. I think we ought to have a lay board of education, you know, on the state level. I think a state superintendent, and attorney general, and you just don't have a board at the helm now, and I think it'd be good.
How would you propose to select a label?
Well, I think it should be by gubernatorial appointment with approval, perhaps by the Senate.
Senate?
Yeah. That's all the top of it is.
Around the state.
Oh, yeah, from teachers. Teachers should definitely have an input into it. So should the administrators, so should the patrons, so should your taxpayers. But you don't want it too big, I mean, I don't think it functions. That's off the top of the head, without really being honest.
Okay, well, good. The next one, you've got some expertise in, I know it's.
Judicial reform.
Right.
Yeah, I have the Mississippi Bar Association has made a proposal to all the candidates for the creation of a judicial reform study.
Right.
And I've committed to that judicial reform study proposed by the Mississippi Bar Association.
Well, of course, one of the things there, the legislature did address itself with the problems of the JP system. We'll have a constitutional amendment to vote on in November. And this thing we got here was
Now, you telling me,
adopted
I was not
prior to-
even aware of that. You mean we will vote on the JP system in November?
Right, have some improvements in it, right.
Yeah. Let me
Well,
hurry.
since January, I've been campaigning, I didn't even know that.
Well, what I meant by that was that, that matter was dealt with after this was adopted. So,
Mhm.
from our point of view, we think that the legislature has addressed itself to the problems, many of the problems relating to the JP system.
That's good.
Educational requirements.
That is a genuine problem, the JP system.
So I think that now what we have to do is wait and see whether it's passed and whether or not it does what we would like to see it do.
Okay. Well, I'm in agreement on that.
So
JP system.
having said that, then the problem now is the rest of the judicial system and the fact that it takes so long to, for some cases to be heard and completed within the framework of the present system. And what you said is that you were in favor of a commission being set up to review the judicial system.
By the Mississippi Bar
By the
Association,
Mississippi
they
Bar
have the
Association.
details of it, which I don't have. It is a
Right.
specific proposal.
But
And I'm
you are
committed to
for and recognize the need
Oh, yes.
to improve the judicial.
Now, I am for, and in principle, I am for an elected judiciary, I'm not for an appointed judiciary.
Okay, that's good, that's good. All right, do you want to
And I'm
come
not
in
for,
further on that?
well, no, I think that pretty well covers it. I'm not for replacing, I'm a political scientist, I majored in it, I got a medal in it when I was academic record in it when I was in college. But I do not agree with many of the recommendations of political scientists to make everybody appointed and responsible to one man.
Amen.
We're in agreement with that.
Most of the people I have seen in appointed positions and tend to become stale in their job and not responsive, particularly in the judiciary. We get some bad judges, but if we do, we can sure vote them out. And if they're appointed, they become arbitrary and tyrants in the state.
I agree with that.
I had an old law partner who, Toxie Hall, who, incidentally, he was a plaintiff's lawyer most of his life, and he said he had seen it both ways, with appointed and elected, and he'd by far prefer the elected, with all this shortcomings.
Right. Nothing's perfect.
All right, 14, I'm for it, and I'm for it to such an extent, gubernatorial succession, that I'm willing to exclude the incumbent, if I hope would be me. 15, no objection. And incidentally with that, I don't know if you were aware of it, but this past Tuesday, I had a press conference and I gave my complete income tax returns for the past 4 years. Statement of assets and liabilities at the present time. A little bit embarrassing, but I gave it. But well, a man's got 5 kids. He's not going to accumulate much if he's trying to educate them and put them through school.
Mr. Randy
4
had
kids.
16, he knows.
Six.
Yeah, I have
Especially if
5.
you're when you're honest.
Yeah. And I intend to do the same thing before going in the governor's office. And I intend to do the same thing going out of the governor's office and annually, if it's wanted. I am naive about state politics, but I'm not stupid. I have never run for state office before, and I've had very little to do with any state politics. I've run my office as district attorney, and I've never had an opponent. And I've never had an opponent because I ran my office and stayed out of state politics. But I learned shortly after I announced, someone told me, he said, well, you know when you go in the governor's office that you'll come out with $100,000. And I said, no, I don't know that. So that's customary. They get together and they make this. And, the colonel's like, well, you aware of this? I never had thought about it.
Nice to
That's the
know.
reason why you got all these colonels.
What's the qualifying date?
Yeah, I was going to ask,
Well, some get houses, some, and so on. But that's a sum that they all this contribute the colonels make up.
Right.
And so I thought about it very carefully, and I discussed it with my wife, who has an interest in it too. And I said, I'm just not going to do that. The salary pays $43,000 beginning next year, and that's darn good salary. And about what I'd average practicing law last year, being DA practicing law and reserve pay, because the past couple of years I made some money from in reserve by being in command of the unit and going on active duty. And you get the house free and a lot of other incidentals that go with it that I just don't see the necessity for it, and I'm not going into this thing to make money. And so that's my reason for now and when you go out. And if somebody gives you a gift, they get together and buy you a car, then report it. Let them know that you got it and who gave it to you.
So you're not gonna have a staff of colonels and each one of them kick in a certain amount?
Oh, I'm sure I'll have a staff of colonels, and
No,
they'll
that's
have to pay
kick
for
in a certain
to
amount.
raise money for me.
Right, well, this is what I was.
Hey, I could almost afford to be his colonel.
It won't be a moneymaker.
Well, you wanna get on to that next one, or you wanna?
15, that's,
This
what,
16.
16, all right. Well, I'm committed to reform of the A&I board to remove it from politics, and I think, I'm sure Talmadge Littlejohn, who was just ahead of me, is committed to the same proposition of making it on staggered term. And my reason for that, because this is a governance program, but my reason for wanting to do that is the average life of the A&I director is 18 months, and you just can't have, I think the past 4 years, you just can't have a good program with losing your director every 4 years, or a complete changeover every 4 years. And my concept of it is the A&R board should be a search facility, and the Research and Development Center should be a research facility. One researching and the other one searching, and they should be brought together. I don't think it's necessary to immediately abolish them. I don't think you can do that. But I think a governor can, with leadership, bring the two together to where they function better than what they've been functioning. Now, I would include on the A&R board all segments of our society, including conservationists and labor. We've had no labor input in an industrial search, and we've had no conservation input on an industrial search.
Very true.
And now that doesn't mean that labor is going to, say we don't want him because he's coming in and he's non-union, because in some communities they so desperately need jobs they'll take anything. But that's rare, and I think it should be unusual circumstances when we seek that type of industry for our state. My community and most communities just simply can't take any more textile industries. They don't need them. But some communities could well use a little textile plant because they don't have anything else.
Sure do.
Well, that's well spoken. You perhaps already answered the next one when we talked about when that on the other.
Just a
sheet.
minute,
Yeah.
Mr. Ramsey, before this comes under general, we haven't mentioned tourism.
Oh,
as
Gad,
such.
wait a minute, I'm glad you said that. We went down to, where was I, Mississippi Industrial Development Council. I spoke the other day, and I said just what I'm saying to you about the A&R board and about input from conservationists and labor. I was asked at that, do you intend to meet with labor, and do you intend to seek labor vote? And I said, yes, I do intend. I already had this meeting here, I already met on the coast. I said, I already have, and I do intend to, and I intend to seek the votes of everybody that I can. But we were talking about getting industry. I'm getting up to the tourism thing, and I leaned over to Talmadge, sitting next to him, and I said, Talmadge, the thing that really disturbs me on this whole proposition, we're talking about bringing in industry. Where are we going to get the energy? Let's say we got all the industry we wanted. Where are you going to get the energy to operate it? If we don't have enough gas, we don't have enough electricity. If we was tremendously successful, I don't know if we could get the energy we need to operate all the industrial programs. That bothers me. We're talking about getting it, and we're not talking this on the stump, but it's, we had an industry that was talking about coming to Columbia. And they were right on the verge, and the energy crisis just eliminated because of the product they were going to make, first of all, and secondly because they had a high usage of natural gas. You just not getting more natural gas. It doesn't look like. So, while we were driving away, while I was driving back home with my campaign manager, I said, the thing we're overlooking is the one industry that does not consume energy, and that's tourism. And we just have not fully capitalized on that. We've made an effort at it, and it's been a good effort, but not a massive effort. Now here's another thing that struck me, and it might not bounce good off of you. We've got a lot of people on unemployment. I don't know how many. We've got a good many. We've got a lot of college people who are hunting for jobs in the summer. Then we don't have them for them. They don't have any place to work. Why not have a state recreational corps where college kids can work in the summer, and some people who are unemployment would rather work than not work, can go out and for their purpose be designed, so call it a conservation corps, of developing our parks, our recreation areas throughout the entire state, improving the approaches to the state, acting as ambassadors to people coming into the state. Now, that's just a concept. I don't have any particulars on it.
Federal Congress has under consideration at the present time a program similar to what you're talking about, provide public service jobs, do many things
to do this sort of thing, but the emphasis being on
This
tourism,
is
which
not
is.
Mr. Knight's problem. Mr.
Yeah.
Knight's
That's
got a
mine.
problem, and I want you to hear about it.
My question is this, in connection with tourism, I mean, it's kinda comical, but it's really in a serious vein, as a person who travels the state all the time. You talk about tourism. My question is this, if you were governor, will you do something about the disgraceful situation that we've got with these little signs, rest area, not a restroom in 40 miles? You know,
that's the whole
this is
problem.
insult to people, when in most all of the other states in this nation,
Absolutely.
they've got restrooms, a water fountain, you know,
Oh,
a
absolutely, Tom.
real down there.
And some of them is not in the
It's,
woods.
We've done
It's
some,
really a
we've done
disgrace.
some,
Oh, they
traveling,
use one.
traveling and camping, and what I talk about on this court would do that. They would build rest areas.
Yeah.
They
With
would
rest
build
rooms.
right side park.
Right.
They would clean up our approaches. They would go into small communities that do not have the resources for developing some natural attraction, a camping area. And they would assist the local community in doing this. It's a concept. Now, the other thing I do, and gosh knows I've been in law enforcement, and I don't want to get on the stump and say this because I know what it do to some of my highway patrol friends. But what I would like to see done, and what I would propose to do, is on the entrances into the state, where your highway patrolman sit. When a man comes in doing 70 miles an hour, highway patrolman pulls him over. Welcome to the state of Mississippi. You're violating our speed laws, but we're glad to have you here, and we hope that you'll abide by our laws when you're here in the state. And I'm not going to give you a ticket. We're not setting up a speed trap. We want to welcome you to Mississippi. And while you're in here, though, we want to ask you to abide by our speed laws. I think, first of all, he'd be 90%, I would, you would, somebody do you that, obeying the speed laws, and I'd drive too fast. But if I went into a state and they did me that way, I'd have to drive within the speed laws.
Yeah.
And then say, where are you going, where's your destination? Well, down the road here, there's certain sites that you need to see. Let them become ambassadors to people coming in the state as well.
I agree
Because
with
you
you.
can get a man coming, particularly on the coast,
100%.
you can get a man coming in, he and his family, ready for a vacation, and coming in the state, and pull him over and run him to JP and charge him $20, and boy, he can't wait to get out.
Burns his vacation.
I've got to say
That's
something.
true, I agree.
I travel in 3 states along with Mississippi, and I've been done this in other states, by the way. Give a warning, but it was a nice warning and so forth, and it made you feel good, and like you say, it made you hold that speed down there. But let me tell you, I hadn't brought this up to any other candidate, but then you brought it up. If you're elected governor, I hope you do something about these highway patrols sitting back in these pine thickets, 4 cars of them, and drunks driving by and run you off the road and all. Don't get me wrong, if I'm speeding, they catch me, I never complain, but I want them
I
to
do,
know
but I
that
take
there's
my
something besides speeding
Yeah.
in law. And they sit in the same place, if you just remember. So who do they get? They don't get the local people, they get the tourists coming into the
That's what they
state.
do.
The local people can tell
That's
you
the
every
whole
hole
idea,
they've
is
got
to get
water
out
out back in pine
If
trees.
they get the out-of-state man, there's not too much he can do about it.
That's
He-
right.
He can't ruffle. But it's part of the way the system is. It's not just the highway patrolman, it's a system of making money on it for the JPs. But and I'm for highway safety, and we're gonna have to hold it down.
All you
But,
got to do in the state of Mississippi, if you
but-
drive behind somebody from that county, if you driving in Rankin County, you find somebody with a Rankin County tag on, drive behind.
Well,
Same way in Jackson, any other, 'cause then all of a sudden you see them slowing down. Don't you pass them.
But it's a hard thing to have, 'cause I've worked with highway patrolmen all my life, and you've got good ones and you got bad ones. Most of them are good. But you can have one that's a good highway patrolman, and he does his job, but he'll go too far sometime, and you call him in and say, you're going too far. What's the matter? You're not law enforcement. I mean, tremendous defensive about
That's
it.
right, that's a problem.
And,
Well,
it's a problem dealing with it. But if you can just sell just on the entrances into the state, some of them that's their job.
You could talk their language, I'm sure.
That this is what we want them to do, slow them down, but let's do it in a different manner.
Just in the pine trees south of Hattiesburg, huh? You think you can get out there?
Well, you've hit a very responsive
I know
chord,
where they
Mr.
are, too.
Dantin, as you can see,
You watch
and
them
of course,
CDs
this is
come out
one
pretty good.
thing.
They got them CDs with
This
the
is
truck
one
speed
area.
up, you know it's all right to go.
This is one area that the governor of Mississippi can do a lot of good in,
Do a lot
and
of good.
doesn't require legislative action. Now,
That's right.
you
That's
know, we
right.
recognize the fact that under our system, the governor doesn't have a whole lot of authority, but the man that you appoint to head up the
But he can have
public
any
service
governor.
commissioner,
The governor
he's
can have
answerable
any.
to the governor, therefore
That's
the
right.
governor can
Well, that, the
have a
law
lot of
enforcement law,
input
yeah.
in this area.
Sure can.
Well, we're in simply what you said. Now, we wanna move a little more, because we want, you to answer a few more questions, and you afford you an opportunity to tell us about some things perhaps we haven't covered. Now, you've already, I think, indicated that in some of these key areas on boards and commissions, where we have a definite interest, that you will sit down and consult with representatives of the labor movement before you make these key appointments.
Yeah.
Now, another question that we're very much concerned about is the fact that as governor, you be titular head of the Democratic Party. We'd like to know what your plans are in this area in terms of, you know, solidifying and developing a unified Democratic Party in this whole area. Would you address yourself to
I
that?
sure will. I was asked that question, right after I announced on JC Forum here in Jackson on Channel 16, and what I said then, I haven't changed. I would like to see the Democratic Party become a unified party in Mississippi. I'd like to see the loyalists and the regulars come together. Now that's easy to say, it's awfully hard to do. But I would like to, but I'd like to see them come together in unity, even if there's not agreement. I don't know if you're gonna be able to get agreement right now, but at least come together in unity. And moving, I don't know if you, and that's what I'm committed to, is to moving in that direction. It's gonna take giving and taking, and I'd like to see us do it before 76, because I'd like to see us go as a party. Now, my concept is this: if we go together and we go to convention in 76, there are gonna be different factions who are for different candidates. Well, let them be. If you've got one faction that wants to be for Julian Bond, let them do it. If you've got one faction that wants to be for George Wallace, let them do it. If you've got one faction that wants to go for somebody else, let them do it. But that's the first step. Hopefully, from that, we can then become a unified party with agreement. And we can give and take on candidates, and maybe come up with one that we can all be for. Now, someone asked me, won't you just be perpetuating divisiveness if you do it that way? I said, well, I don't know. I don't think so. I don't know any other way to go right now. I've seen our black and white school systems come together and been able to get away from different poles and come together on compromises that have worked, and both sides have been satisfied. And now that's the direction I want to see it go. I sure as heck do not have an answer to how to do it, but that's the concept for doing it.
But you do, Mr. Dantin, evidently, from what you said, recognize the importance of the leadership of the chief executive.
Oh,
in
yes,
this
sir. I
thing.
think he's got to take the lead on it, and I think it's got to be a give and take on it.
And you do recognize
Oh,
the fact that we need to work within the framework of the Democratic Party,
There's no question about
even
it.
though we don't agree on individual.
No question about that. I just don't think this country can stand a multitude of third parties or fourth parties. I think if we go into the same direction that France went, then we're going to have the same problems they did, with perhaps even not having methods of restoring national health. But go ahead.
You know, I'm proud to hear you state your position on the party situation. Of course, it's my belief that it's impossible to negotiate a party unity. That, you know,
Agreement, way.
you know, sit down and say we're gonna negotiate an agreement on party unity, I think it's mute, remote, but, you know, we have a process by which we elect delegates to the national convention. The DNC, has guidelines in which, we have to follow to, you know, comply with the national party rules. And my belief is that all we need to do is follow this process, follow those guidelines, and get the people involved in this process and these guidelines, and we're gonna have party unity. I think this is the only way it can come about. I think saying that, you know, I'm gonna give you this if you do that, and we'll give you this, I think it's ridiculous.
You're talking about starting at a precinct meeting?
Right, I'm saying get the
Everybody
people,
go regardless
get the
of party
people
line,
out,
yeah.
get the people out and get them involved and follow that process to the line. And when you get to the
Well-
convention, wherever it is, you got no problem.
No.
Other
The
words,
problem is you've got your loyalists and your regulars that, each one will hold their own primaries, I suppose. I mean, their own precinct meetings.
Well, some of them wanna get in that phone booth and tell everybody else what to do too.
Let's
Get
do
all
it.
6 of them in one
Yeah,
place.
I understand that, but what I'm saying is that it's up to us to say to the Democrats in Mississippi, regardless of what faction they're identified with, is that this is the process, and let's all get involved in this one process.
Well, that's all right, I have no objections to that, but I'm afraid what you're going and like, I'm really no expert on this, but I'm afraid what you're going to encounter is, if you were to do that, and it would come out predominantly regulars, you know, they'd get in there and they'd take over the precinct election, and you'd come up with your predominantly regular party, just like you have now, that your loyalists, they're gonna say, no, sir.
Well, I could say that when there was a quota system, in fact, in the DNC guidelines. But I think now, the only thing that we could consider a quota in the guideline would be in reference to sex. When we talk about race and age and all that stuff, you know, that's out of the question. All I'm saying is that if the guidelines are followed, then I don't think no one group could get before the DNC Credentials Committee and say, I challenge this person because he didn't do this. If you follow the guidelines, you got no challenge.
Well,
And I
but
think
the problem I think you have is, well, you know more about guidelines than I do, I'm not familiar with them, but I'm afraid that in order to have your precinct meetings and elections, that you need to have the two at least under
Yeah, well,
a banner of holding them in concert.
The guideline does not require precinct convention. It says that the delegates should be selected from a level of geographic area not smaller than, a congressional district, not larger than a congressional district. I think this is something that we've done in the state because of state statute or state practice as far as electing delegates. But I think it was demonstrated, in the delegate selection to the mini convention in Kansas City last December, that if the process is followed, we got no problem. And, you can call them loyalists or regulars. Of course, me, I'm a Democrat without a prefix, but you can call them loyalists or regulars or whatever you want to. We saw right here in the 4th congressional district, in selecting delegates, that, we selected delegates that may have, could have been of either benefit, because I was one of them, and somebody said, you a loyalist. I said, well, hell, I'm a Democrat,
Well, I follow, but what I'm saying, I do wanna see us have a state Democratic Party.
Oh, I
And
do
wanna see
too,
it
I
happen.
do too, I think.
Now, not a lot of people, no, I mean, I'm not speaking for other candidates, but I heard one, say at an open meeting that, as for him and his house, he was George Wallace.
Yeah.
And I don't,
Well, see, the guidelines don't.
I don't believe in that.
Don't permit, don't permit the unit rule. The guidelines don't permit the unit rule, and national party, so.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's
You
right.
couldn't go
Sure.
to the convention with the unit rule anyway.
No.
If I'm a delegate, I got
If
my.
you went as a
preference.
unit rule, you might as well,
Right.
that's what I'm saying.
Right.
The main thing here, Mr. Dantin, is as governor of Mississippi, you'll lend the influence of your office towards
To bring
developing-
together the Democratic Party.
Right, and
I
very-
think
to
that's.
support the nominees of the party at the level.
If I'm gonna be a member of it, I intend to support it. Now,
Right.
if for some reason, it's a matter of conscience that I could not support it, then I would have to resign from the party. I think that's what
Right. Well, the next question here is one along these lines. In the event you do not win the nomination of the Mississippi party in this election, do you plan on supporting the man that does in November?
Probably take no part in it at all. I don't know, I ain't giving that any thought.
See, whoever wins the nomination.
I understand,
will have to
Democratic
face
nomination
Mr.
would have to
Carmack.
face Gil Carmack. I have a particular problem with that other people don't have. Gilbert and I were raised together, so he's from Columbia. We were childhood friends, we played on the creek banks together, we worked in drugstores together. It'd be awfully hard for me to take an active role, against him if I wasn't a Democratic nominee.
Well, you wouldn't endorse him,
Oh,
neither.
hell no.
In other words, it's a personal thing with you on that particular candidate.
Listen, my nephew was, at Southern and, young fella, and he, called himself a Republican, and he thought Gilbert hung the moon. He just was really very fond, and, so when I announced it, caused him some agony to have to change over and support his uncle. We were very close, and he did. And, but I saw Gilbert at one of the rallies, and I said, boy, I sure did cause my nephew some problems. He said, yeah, poor Steve said I had to grant him a dispensation for this. But I mean, he and my brother and Gilbert graduated from high school together, went in the Navy together. And, but it's a personal thing. But I wouldn't make any endorsement. I sure wouldn't support him, as having run a Democratic primary.
Well, that's very frank and candid, I think. We're gonna try to get you out of here by 1. I'm not trying to rush you, but, Ms. Phillips has gotta go and you gotta go, and I don't know how many other folks have to go, but we've got a couple more questions we want you to address to. Do you have anything else, in the way of legislation, either you want to try to get through or opposed to that we haven't discussed yet? We pretty well called.
I think we covered everything. I don't remember anything right off.
All right, then the next question is, do you want support of organized labor in the
Yes.
campaign? You want the support of organized labor?
Wouldn't be here if I
Didn't,
Well,
didn't I
let's-
understand you to say that you told this group over here the other day that you were trying to get the support of organized labor?
I told him I wanted the support of all citizens. Sure did. I don't know if I said I was trying to get the support of organized labor, but I said I was gonna meet with you, and I wanted to, he asked me, would I meet with you, and did I want the support of organized labor, and my recall is, I said I want the support of, all people.
Yeah, I
Well, we appreciate you coming, Mr. Dantin. We